Is there anything better than beauty YouTube drama? I don't think I've ever been as entertained as I was in 2018. Time and place. But that was then. In this time and place, we have a new scandal. In the summer of 2024, one of the beauty community's most down-to-earth darlings, RawBeautyKristi, fell from grace. After 15 years on YouTube, where she developed and maintained a reputation for being irreverent, honest, and generally reasonable, Kristi was spotted in photos from a 4th of July parade alongside a group of parents and children who were waving around homophobic and fundamentalist Christian signs and slogans. The most egregious of these was a sign that said #Don't mess with our kids, which refers to a fundamentalist Christian movement whose main ideological standpoint is an effort to protect children from the influence of non-Christian values at school, specifically the influence of queer people. This is what I call HomeschoolGate. This event sent shockwaves through commentary and drama channels, and even some political podcasters chimed in because in the 5 years prior to this, RawBeautyKristi had started a homestead with her husband, had a child, and began wearing a small gold cross necklace in her videos, if you get my drift. And RawBeautyKristi was one of several beauty creators who had gone down the very same path and ended up on the wrong side of history. People were shocked, fascinated, and entertained by the story, which appeared to be a sort of cautionary tale. But what if I told you that only some of that is true? What if I told you that almost all of the coverage around RawBeautyKristi's alleged transphobia and support of Donald Trump's government actually just refers to like 2 Reddit threads and a Peter Mon video? What if I told you that RawBeautyKristi has actually disavowed the Trump government and transphobia on multiple occasions, but her words have been willfully misinterpreted to somehow circuitously mean that she actually hasn't taken a stand? What if I told you that there is precedent for critiquing Kristi's position on religion and politics, and that we can tell from her earliest videos that she's susceptible to misinformation, but she's definitely not a lost cause? The truth about what happened in HomeschoolGate is that something definitely went down in 2024, and it began a long time before that. But with everyone so focused on reading between the lines of Kristi's words, we've missed a huge amount of logical fallacies, mistakes, and made-up facts from the commentators who covered HomeschoolGate. So I set out to find out once and for all if RawBeautyKristi is actually MAGA like everyone says that she is. If you followed this story, please prepare yourself to learn new information and hear an original take about this. And if you've never heard of RawBeautyKristi, welcome and buckle up, because this is one of those true stories that sticks with you. I hope you're tall enough to ride this roller coaster, because your stomach is absolutely going to jump into your throat as we traverse the highs and lows of Kristi's online career. Let's go. Hello and welcome. Let me get this out of the way. I'm disgruntled townsperson, an anonymous medieval peasant. Hear ye, subscribe and ring the bell. Today, I'm disgruntled about the coverage surrounding RawBeautyKristi's shocking turn to conservatism. I make deep dives and video essays about whatever I want to, and this question has been plaguing me for the last 2 years. This is a long video because I like long videos, but if you just want the juicy parts, you can go ahead and use the timestamps in the description box below. I also have a sources document linked in my video description, so I do recommend exploring that. Now, I started following Kristi in 2018, and after HomeschoolGate in 2024, I chose to remain her subscriber. I was curious to see how much of these accusations were actually true. A part of me felt like something was missing. Kristi didn't address any of this for over a year, but the commentary was loud and persistent. Even without new information, people online were finding different things that they said pointed towards Kristi's true character. So I'm going to cover Kristi's entire career. We're going to get a solid understanding of who she is and what she believes, and then I'm going to lay out all of the events of the HomeschoolGate scandal and unpack what actually happened. I'm really excited to share this with you because I have been absolutely appalled at some of the things that I found out. This is a story that is really about misinformation and disinformation, so I'm just going to go ahead and define those terms now. Misinformation refers to false information that is shared by people who believe it to be true, mostly because they want to share it out of good faith. Whereas disinformation refers to intentionally shared false information to further some sort of agenda. There's a lot of false information in this story, but it does actually matter how that information information is framed, especially when we're trying to learn about somebody's political and spiritual ideology. There's always the question of why someone is saying something that isn't true. Are they saying it because they have a larger goal and this false information is going to support that? Or are they sharing this information because they genuinely think that it's helpful and insightful? Let's just keep that question in mind. On the 26th of January 2011, 23-year-old Kristi posted her first ever video to YouTube under the channel name KMaven04. This channel would be Kristi's internet home for about 2 years, and it was almost entirely themed around her and her husband trying to conceive while she struggled with infertility and PCOS, which, by the way, has recently been renamed PMOS, polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, and also her chronic pain. A lot of it is about her chronic pain. She made uncut, unedited diary-style videos talking openly about her body, her dreams and desires, and her emotions. So Kristi's obsessive need to be a mother is front and center in this first channel. Kristi was seeking community from other women who were struggling to conceive.
I really want to be a mom, like more than anything in the whole world. And
Kristi and Zach would end up trying countless medical interventions, often meaning that they burned through almost every dollar they made at the time.
We are currently on a TTC break because of money issues. It's costing us about $600-700 a month to go to the reproductive endocrinologist, and that's fine. I'm out of work right now.
The second obsessive element of Kristi's personality is her intense anxiety. So as KMaven04, Kristi expresses deep sadness and disappointment at her constant failure to get pregnant. She shares a shocking amount of medical information related to her infertility and also to her chronic health conditions, which we will get into. But the way that she talks about herself is so self-deprecating that it's actually really hard to watch.
I've been selfish. I wanted a baby now, and I wanted to have a baby now, and I want to get pregnant now, and every day I wake up and I just kind of laugh when I look in the mirror because I don't even recognize myself anymore. I've gotten so fat. Kidding you, I've gained 10 pounds. And I can feel it and I can see it and I can just like, my jowls, and I just like, I'm not making excuses. I'm saying that I am a frickin' excuse maker, and that's just what I'm so sick of my excuses that I make.
Later in her career, Kristi would be well known for her self-deprecating style of humor, which would be interpreted by her audience as funny and down to earth. But to see where this came from as KMaven04, you get a really different picture. She blames herself for everything. If she doesn't conceive, it's because she hasn't done something consistently enough. It's just really sad because every new thing that she tries, every hormone injection or basal body temperature methodology, she pins all of her hopes on it, and then when it doesn't pan out, she talks about it as though she let herself down, rather than the upsetting truth that it simply didn't happen for her. This channel also sows the seed of Kristi's deeply parasocial and personal relationship with her audience because she made it so she could join an online community that wasn't available to her in real life. She felt alone in her struggle to conceive, but online she made real connections with people who helped her to feel less alone.
If anybody else has any like advice about, you know, how to do it or the best way to start, I mean, it would all be greatly appreciated. I'm gonna start trying to conceive video logs as well. I guess being a woman trying to conceive and going through infertility struggles, it's really hard for me to see somebody who, in my opinion, got so lucky with something that is so amazing, and it's so difficult to do for me that taking it for granted.
As a result, though, this channel feels like something private, almost between friends. She shares some really vulnerable moments, but interestingly, this lack of boundaries with her audience carries on seamlessly in the next channel, even when she grows a massive audience. Now, the third of Kristi's obsessions, unfortunately, is a constant war with her weight and her body. Not only is she obsessively unhappy with her size and her constant attempts to lose weight, but she's also plagued by several severe chronic health issues that cause her to experience chronic pain over her entire adult life. In her first ever video, 23-year-old Kristi announces to her audience that she is beginning the low-fat, raw vegan 80-10-10 diet.
I learned about the raw food diet a long time ago, and I had tried it off and on. I mean, I've tried to do the raw food diet a lot of times, But after recently reading about 80-10-10 and all those things, I realized that I'm doing it wrong.
And that she hopes this extreme diet is going to fix a number of things, but most primarily that it will help her to lose weight and hopefully to conceive a child. And this, unfortunately, is just the beginning of Kristi's journey with fad diets and health disinformation that would lead to some irreversible and lasting consequences, including surgery. Before I go into detail about what raw veganism is and how Kristi was influenced to pursue this lifestyle, I just want to wrap up this channel KMaven04. After many ups and mostly downs, on the 22nd of February 2013, Kristi uploads a video titled Big Changes and New Beginnings. And in this video, she talks about how she's come to terms with her infertility and she's beginning the journey of emotionally moving on from her keen desire for motherhood. She would still go on to upload a couple of key videos on this channel, mostly to do with her weight, but this is a turning point for Kristi where she begins to grieve and accept the fact that her lot in life just isn't what she wishes that it would be. She wasn't going to fall pregnant, she wasn't going to get skinny, and if she kept trying, it might make everything worse. So at this time, she had her YouTube channel for about a year and a half. She found comfort and joy in that experience. And she realized that she wasn't going to be able to keep making videos for this community because she was no longer actively trying to conceive. So she wanted to make a new channel. And she spoke to one of her friends who'd also been making YouTube videos who suggested that she create a makeup channel. Interestingly, and contrary to everything that she says when she starts this channel, she mentions on a podcast in 2022 that she actually didn't know anything about makeup when she started her makeup channel, and that she went out and bought products specifically to start making videos with the intention of teaching herself about makeup while she made tutorials. And I mention this not to suggest that Kristi is a liar, but to introduce this idea of how important community is to Kristi. She created RawBeautyKristi, which would go on to be a highly influential makeup and beauty channel, not for makeup and beauty, but instead because she enjoyed the experience of making videos and finding community in the comments. From day zero, we see that Kristi finds a lot of value, support, and validation in creating a community for herself online. I want to elaborate on the elements of her life in this before cross necklace era that is KMaven04 and RawBeautyKristi, because these are the years where Kristi wears either no necklace or a necklace with the initials of herself, her husband, and in coming years, her son. From 2013 to 2024, Kristi would make almost 1,000 videos, and in these videos is the complex story of her life before she turned to Christ. Are you ready? I don't know if you're ready. We're gonna talk about some wackadoodle shit. Let's go. If you've been on the internet for a long time, you may have heard about raw veganism or the phrase 80-10-10, or maybe just the YouTuber Freely the Banana Girl. These concepts circulated with increasing prevalence from about 2010 to maybe 2014 or 2015. Now, Kristi hit the ground running with raw veganism in 2011, but unfortunately, this diet had some irreversible impacts on her body. Raw veganism is exactly what it sounds like. It's veganism, except you're not allowed to eat anything that's been cooked. There were two main subsets of the raw vegan lifestyle because apparently it just wasn't restrictive enough on its own, one of which is called the 80-10-10 diet, which Kristi was really into. This was established by a guy called Dr. Douglas Graham.
For me, lettuce is like candy.
What kind of doctor is he? He's a retired chiropractor, so that gives us a clue as to what we're in for. Basically, the 80 stands for 80% of your calories coming from carbs, and then you get 10% of your calories coming from protein and 10% from fats. Alina Peters wrote a great article about this in 2023 titled The 80-10-10 Diet, Healthy Diet or Dangerous Fad. And in it she wrote, the 80-10-10 diet is based on the idea that humans aren't naturally omnivores, but rather frugivores, or animals that prefer to eat fruit. It suggests that although humans can tolerate other types of foods, those foods aren't optimal. Well, I gotta tell you, my experience with eating too much fiber from tender leafy greens would not tend to agree with that interpretation. But the claims from this diet are outlandish. Dr. Doug Graham actually claims that the high carb content of the 80-10-10 diet helps to prevent and heal eating disorders because you would just be so full of this high volume of fruit every day that you would stop thinking about food. I think the implicit claim was that you couldn't have an eating disorder if you did the 80-10-10 diet because you would be eating a lot of food, but you would also be really skinny. But of course, that's not all, because thanks again to Alina Peters, the other alleged benefits of the 80-10-10 diet include weight loss, clearer sinuses, easier breathing, better sleep, clearer skin, heightened mental clarity, and an overall longer, healthier life. Oh, also, its low content of protein and fat is said to offer protection against cancer, diabetes, organ failure, weak bones, and heart disease. Wow, doesn't that sound amazing? Well, there was one person in Kristi's life to whom this did sound amazing, and that was her mother, who was dying of cancer. This is a really heartbreaking story and a traumatic event that shaped who Kristi is. And for many years, Kristi didn't even mention it, and her audience had no idea. But after a while, she started mentioning her mother every now and then. And it's from one of these tiny mentions in a video from February 2026 that I found out that her mother actually attempted the raw vegan diet after being diagnosed with cancer.
My mom didn't eat meat. She did all growing up. She got cancer and then she switched her diet. And when she switched her diet, we all kind of ended up naturally switching our diets. And I just couldn't help it, because I cared so much for animals, and I cared so much for their well-being, and I cared so much for the rights of animals and how bad I knew that meat was, because my mom was really, granted, you're hearing one side of things, and this was back before the internet had like the ability to like look shit up. The internet was literally still brand new at this point. So anyway, I totally was for the longest time. And then my mom died. So the raw vegan diet not that it didn't work. It's just, she died. I don't want to get into that right now.
So we can start to piece together the kind of environment where Kristi's critical thinking skills developed. And it seems to be the kind of environment where people would believe things out of hope and throw themselves into things with reckless abandon. And this is a pattern that we will see from Kristi as well. But back to raw veganism, because I shouldn't laugh. Oh my gosh. Because Dr. Doug Graham's movement actually morphed further away from reason, and it was YouTube itself and the creators who started to popularize raw veganism that turned 80-10-10 into this thing called 30 bananas a day. 30 bananas a day is exactly what it sounds like. Kristi would go on to attempt this diet, and she has described how disgusting it was to try to drink smoothies made only of very ripe bananas and water, and consume nothing else.
Felt like shit, dude. I felt like shit. And no matter how long I did it for, I felt sick. I just didn't feel good. And I would post on the forums. I remember going to the 30 bananas a day forums, and I was like, hey, I don't feel good. Is there anything that you guys could recommend that I could do? And they're like, eat more bananas. And I'm like, okay, I've had 30 bananas today and like 40 dates, and I feel like my blood is like jumping out of my body, but okay, I'll eat more bananas. My counter was just covered in bananas and fruit flies. It was just a whole thing. Anyway.
But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because that didn't work for Kristi, she did move on to other restrictive and damaging crash diets, including juice fasts. Kristi describes a couple of instances where she basically didn't eat for extended periods of time, sometimes a couple of days, at one point about 2 weeks.
I juice fasted and / water fasted. Like I did the first week juice and then the next 2 weeks water. And I did that for 3 weeks. And I lost like 30 pounds in 3 weeks. I looked so good. However, I fucked my body up so bad in those 3 weeks. Like I cannot explain to you.
And unfortunately, as a result of this, she developed gallstones and then gallbladder disease. But to understand why she would do this, we have to return once again to Kristi's place in online communities, because in 2013, when she was doing all of this stuff, Kristi was not only a part of the infertility community on YouTube, she was also part of a YouTube community called Project Not Fat, where it seemed a lot of people were coming together to encourage each other in the pursuit of crash diets that basically amounted to nothing more than health disinformation. And the amount of videos that Kristi has made about losing weight or being fat is exorbitant, to be honest with you. And this is a feature of her entire career on YouTube, from KMaven04 to RawBeautyKristi, including the creation of a character that Kristi called Kriste, which is like an alter ego of hers. I will have to play you a clip because I don't even know how to describe this.
Because the second my husband's gone, it's like, I don't have a choice. She comes out and she decides that she's gonna take over the night, and here she comes. Because I've been eating Been eating ice cream all night. I had about half pint ice cream, some white cheddar. If there's one thing that I know, it's that having a chin only makes you better. I get to be my fat self. I get to feel what it's like to have chicken running through my veins.
But what's interesting about Chinsty is that I've been following Kristi since at least 2018, and I have never associated her with creating sensationalist, fatphobic thumbnails, titles, and videos, but that's absolutely what she's done like the entire time, and she's still doing it. Like, I remember that maybe like once or twice a year I'd see a video from her and Zach about losing weight.
Not fitting and stuff is like the worst. Like, go to the store and then you don't even want to shop.
Yeah.
You try something on and you're like, I was an extra large 2 weeks ago, and now you're not.
And now I'm an XXL.
Like, this store doesn't even have my size.
My friend,
none of the stores at the mall,
no,
they don't have my size.
Mall doesn't carry sizes.
You know
for
what?
Right
they
now.
Don't carry size 38 pants for men. They don't.
Especially 38, 30.
They don't. Short and fat? Nah.
So it's really a testament to Kristi's personality and how enjoyable her makeup content is that I never noticed how much she was talking about her weight. But I guess the other thing is that our norms around conversations about bodies, and fat bodies in particular, have actually changed a lot in the last 10 years. Because when I look back at these videos and the thumbnails, I'm reminded of just how normal this kind of thing was. Kristi wasn't unusual for making videos about her unhappiness in a fat body, and she was in community with people who felt the same way. Unfortunately, you can see that even in 2025 and 2026, Kristi is still doing this. Part of what has made her so beloved and so relatable is the fact that she is a beautiful fat woman who is unapologetically herself, because that was really different from the OG beauty YouTubers, but she's never been okay with her fatness, and the way that she talked about herself and her body was honestly really upsetting. By the end of her first channel, Kristi had tried raw veganism, 80-10-10, 30 bananas a day, juice fasts, and in later years she revealed she had also tried the cabbage soup diet. Probably the hardest part of watching these videos in my research was coming across videos where Kristi explicitly explains that these crash diets had irreversibly negative effects on her health overall.
But to be completely honest, when you want to get skinny, it sounds so dumb and so cliche, like, you'll die to get skinny. Like, you want to do anything because you're so sick of being fat. And okay, I'll go through a myriad of problems that I had. Gallbladder attacks. I started developing cluster migraines, which are the most painful headache that a human can ever experience. They're in my left eye. They feel like my eye's exploding. I have to take Imitrex, or it's sumatriptan. I have to take that or I will like be screaming and dying in pain. I got gout, which is like the old man's disease. Kidney stones, heart palpitations. I remember having heart palpitations. I never really had my period. Granted, I lost weight, but I gained it all back in such a short amount of time. And then it like distributed shitty. I like looked like a big fat floppy mess. It was just rough. It was really rough.
That clip is from a video on Kristi's old channel posted in March of 2013. Chronic health conditions and chronic pain would go on to define her life for the next decade and a half. So she ended up having to have her gallbladder removed, which she talks about in later videos, and that affects her ability to digest food, and it also severely restricts the kind of foods that you can eat. But by 2014, she was describing cluster headaches as her biggest issues. Cluster headaches are a neurological pain condition that sound to me like one of the most intense pain conditions that you can have. The way that Kristi talks about it, she always refers to the fact that people who suffer through cluster headaches consider not being alive to be a pretty solid option when the pain is unmanageable. And in February of 2014, about a year after the video she made on the effect of fasting on her health, Kristi revealed that she had given herself a stomach ulcer from taking too much ibuprofen to survive the pain of her cluster headaches. And the symptoms of this included throwing up all the time, severe stomach pain, as well as not being able to eat much food or keep it down. So at this time, Kristi began to try any and every available therapy for cluster headaches and pain And we start to see her immediately favor natural options or supplements rather than medication prescribed by doctors. She described getting a second opinion from a doctor who recommended that she try a kind of blood pressure medication called verapamil because it was proven to be effective for some people's cluster headaches, but instead she decided to try a very high dose of anti-inflammatory supplements.
But this apparently helps with the suppression of cluster headaches, and I have not taken it for one reason, and that's because I'm going to tell you about what did work for me and what has really significantly helped me. These 3 things here. So I was Google researching one day about verapamil and the side effects. I will do it if it ever gets to the point where I need to. I mean, there's no question about it. Cluster headaches are horrible. But what I did see was this thing called batches supplement protocol.
So to finish up the section, we know that her cluster headaches, gallbladder disease, and she also had issues with kidney stones are merged with her desire to become smaller. Her constant attempts to lose weight actually land her in and out of hospital. I think she feels kind of frustrated and upset that she can go through so much pain and so many periods of throwing up or not being able to keep food down, but her body doesn't diminish in size. So she just keeps trying. The kidney stones are one part of this issue, and she's constantly struggling with the fact that she has no gallbladder as well. But at the same time, she talks about how she's addicted to food, and she's still consistently using this phrase from the raw vegan world, the standard American diet. But this is pre-CrunchyKristi. She's in and out of doctor's offices. She's constantly in this cycle of trying any and every natural solution out of fear of the side effects. But she'll just reach a breaking point where her pain is too much to bear. She'll give in. She'll try the actual medicine, which is prescribed by her doctor. Then she feels much better. And then once she feels better, she'll decide to wean herself off of the good stuff, the medicine. But then the cycle starts again. In April of 2014, Kristi is recommended the ketogenic diet by her doctor, which ends up helping with her PMOS symptoms, her headaches, and it helps her to lose some weight. And this is the one exception to the concerning range of highly restrictive diets that Kristi tries, because this was doctor recommended. She does it a lot of the time under doctor's supervision, and it really does seem to work for her. The ketogenic diet is a restrictive diet. It's very high fat and very, very low carb.
I am on the ketogenic diet right now, is what I call it. I say low carb, same thing. Keto is high fat. It's a high fat, low carbohydrate diet. So eat a lot of avocados, eggs. You can eat a lot of meat if you want. Makes me feel kind of shitty when I just kind of live off of meat. But I love it. I feel so good on the ketogenic diet, and I feel so shitty on the regular diet. So stopping trying to get pregnant, stopping being negative about everything. A lot of that stuff fixed a lot of my other health issues. Keto fixed me. Pretty much. Like, yeah, I'd say not fully, but it's like 90% better. I really mean that.
I don't really understand all of the science behind it, but I do know that it is medically recommended for a variety of conditions, several of which Kristi has. Kristi and Zach would end up going off and on the keto diet for pretty much the next 10 years, following it for years at a time before falling off the wagon. And every time her headaches come back worse when she does fall off the wagon. This breaks from her previously vegan and vegetarian diets, obviously, but honestly, I'm really happy for her because there are some times that keto seems incredibly positive for Kristi. It doesn't cure her chronic pain, but there are times where it seems much more bearable. So with all of that in mind, I do think it's pretty impressive that Kristi was able to achieve so much while she suffered. So I want to talk a little bit about what RawBeautyKristi, the channel we all know, was actually like. Alright, in 2013, Kristi made herself a beauty channel which focused on honest reviews and tutorials. Kristi has an unapologetically millennial aesthetic for the first 5 or 6 years of this channel. In the beginning, she kind of grows out of her emo scene phase, and we see this in the way that she dresses, the kind of makeup that she does, and also in her first home. It's all millennial core. Blue jeans, white tees, macrame hanging on the wall, and the big winged eyeliner.
We're buying our first house, and it is a really cute 1920s built house, and it also, we're gonna be landlords because basically we're buying 2 houses, and then we're gonna have they'll rent from, I don't know, it's very strange.
Yes, in 2014, Kristi and Zach are able to afford their first house, which is pretty much all because Zach worked really hard in this dangerous and high-paying job. So for many years, he did non-destructive testing, where he would test the thicknesses of pipes and things like that in places like oil refineries, and he would use ultrasound technology to do that. It was a dangerous and a time-consuming job. He worked up to 60 hours a week, but it paid pretty well. Zach basically bankrolled their lives for about half a decade before Kristi's social media career overtook his income. And at this time, Kristi worked a variety of odd jobs, and she's claimed many times that she has absolutely no interest in university or higher education. For a good few years around 2013, she worked as a wildlife rehabber because she was really passionate about helping animals. And I think it's also worth noting that she did a doula course over these beginning years because of her obsession with motherhood. So a doula is someone who attends births and kind of assists the midwife, but also really helps the person giving birth to feel safe and supported, and helps them with some strategies to do that as well.
Both went to university and got our degree in becoming a birth doula. Trust me, you guys. I know how this is. Trust me. I took that course, and that was on the weekends for, I don't know how many weeks that was. It wasn't super, super long, but I became a birth doula.
So she was actually present to deliver the babies of like 12 people. I think one of those was her sisters as well. So that's interesting. I don't think she ever really made any money off of that though. When it comes to RawBeautyKristi, the channel, and the makeup she did there, she started out with regular makeup tutorials. She became well known for dabbling in special effects makeup for a couple of years around 2015, 2016. And the videos from this time are absolutely peak Kristi. The amount of effort that went into these is incredible. They are fun to watch. They're original. It's a great creative pursuit, and she's good at it, and I absolutely love to see it.
We're rolling out, looking for America's favorite diners, drive-ins, and dives. On Triple D, we're visiting Big Mama's coffee stand, where she's serving up the best Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwiches. We got a little English muffin, little sausage, little egg, little cheese, a little more English muffin. Let's give this puppy a little taste. Gotta get in the stance.
It is important to note that for most of RawBeautyKristi's career, she was known for being very irreverent and not at all religious. She even spoke sometimes about how disillusioned she was with Christianity.
I'm not super religious. I don't go to church because I just don't like church. I don't like the dynamic of it. I feel weird there. And I love God and I do believe in stuff, but I don't want to, I don't know. I just would rather not go to church. I used to go all the time and I was in the front, hands raised and praising Jesus, and I think that's cool and all. But that church that I was going to got real weird, and they started doing some things that I feel like, the fuck are you doing this at church? This is stupid.
She also used to swear a lot. She put that in the description for every video. It says, "Hi, my name is Kristi. Welcome to my channel. First off, I am not your average YouTube beauty vlogger. I do the typical product reviews, makeup tutorials, lifestyle vlogs, and so much more, all with a sense of humor and a bit of a potty mouth. You can always be assured that I am giving my full and honest opinion. Subscribe and join in on the fun." Fair, it's adorable. Around 2015, she was only making about $100 a month from YouTube, but she was putting so much time and effort into these videos. Like, for a lot of years, she would post 3 to 5 videos a week. And it's definitely worth noting that Kristi made some videos around this time that had to do with her values. She would commentate on the makeup and beauty space and call out behaviors that she felt were not welcoming or inclusive.
Look at it like, could you imagine waking up tomorrow morning and having an entire video made about how much of a piece of shit you are? Could you actually fathom what that would feel like? You either can accept their apology or you can't. It's on you, man. It's all on you. I mean, people can change, dude. People can change. I am living proof of that. I look back on some of my old Facebook posts on my personal Facebook and I just go, who are you? Who are you? If you can look back at your past and say that you are picture perfect, that's great. That's great. We all wish we could be that way, but we're not. We're all human. You think I'm the same person that I was when I was 17? No. I was a hoodlum teenager who was trying to do dumb shit. We should give people the benefit of the doubt. People say stupid shit. Because I used to just be so uncultured. I didn't know fucking anything about anything. Grew up in a really small town, and I just feel like as a person, and being on the internet has helped me so much to learn a lot about the world and different walks of life. I can only hope that I'm not judged for the rest of my life off of stupid shit that I did when I was young. I would only hope that, and I'm sure that you would have hoped the same thing about yourself. We all need to live up to our mistakes and our past and take full responsibility for those things, but when apologies are made, it takes a bigger person to be like, I totally forgive you.
I was getting so disheartened. I'm like, what the fuck is this industry? Like, what am I even doing? And I don't don't feel that way at home. And that's what's so weird about this, is that at home, I feel like I'm doing well, and I feel like things are going well, and like everything's great. And then when I was in LA and I was around people that were making me feel small and insignificant and not even giving me the time of day, and like having the same small talk with me and reintroducing themselves to me even though I've met them like 5 times.
And she would also later make videos about racism and Black Lives Matter, stuff like that.
Watching video after video, reading article after article, and listening to the voices of people who experience this around the world. And I can try to sit there and shut up for a moment and educate myself, because I feel that a huge part to play in all of this is to learn. Whether you feel like you know it all or not, the answer is we don't. It's okay to admit that you don't know everything, and that it's okay to change your mind and to learn. I think that for all of us, we should take a moment, stop arguing, start listening.
She was pretty open in her videos that she was very accepting of queer identities, even though she herself, she wanted to be clear, was not queer. And by 2018, she was really succeeding. She was getting major brand deals. She was being sent overseas for some of these brand deals, gaining a lot of recognition for her honest, no nonsense, and funny reviews. And her commentary on the makeup world was regarded as a breath of fresh air. So in 2019, she released a pretty infamous video about Jaclyn Hill's lipsticks. Jaclyn Hill, if you're unaware, was an influencer who created her own brand. She was one of the earlier ones, and there were major issues with this brand because she appeared to have cut corners in the production of her lipsticks, which was shown to the world in high definition when Kristi brought out her microscope and used it on the lipsticks that she received in PR.
Let's pick one of the ickiest ones. I think I'm going to use, is it Cheeky? Oh my god. Okay, this is the one I'm the most interested to see, because this is the actual hairiest one. I don't know what these hairs are, but we are about to find out. That is absolutely mortifying.
This is around the time that I came to RawBeautyKristi. Like I said, I think I've been following her since about 2018, but things were looking great for her. And if you were following her at that time, I imagine you felt the way that I did, which was that Kristi was just a real person. She made entertaining makeup videos, and occasionally you would become peripherally aware that she had this pain condition with headaches, or that she was on the keto diet or something. It definitely didn't feel at the time to be as integral to her life and content as I now realize both of those things are. But at the same time as she made feel-good, funny, and original videos with a pretty upbeat tone, Kristi was plagued by more than just her physical health conditions. In 2013, which was 5 years before this, Kristi mentioned in a video that her anxiety was so bad that she was afraid of intruders in her bedroom, and she slept with a gun next to her pillow. And I wish I could say that this was just a relic of her past life, but sadly, Kristi's anxiety would only go on to get worse. So let's talk about it. I've mentioned a few times that Kristi defaulted to quote-unquote natural options rather than real medicine, and as with the gun next to her pillow, a lot of this comes down to the overwhelming anxiety that she lives with. But part of it comes down to really bad experiences with medicine. Kristi revealed that she had given herself a stomach ulcer from taking too much ibuprofen to survive the pain of her cluster headaches. The symptoms of this included throwing up all the time, severe stomach pain. This is not something that most people will ever deal with, and I think it's pretty devastating to consider just how much pain she had to be in to take an amount of ibuprofen that would mess up her stomach lining. So it is actually pretty understandable that she has a stronger than normal amount of fear around the side effects of taking medication. We also have to take into account the fact that Kristi's mother, during the most traumatic time in her life, turned to raw veganism in an effort to stay alive. The paradox in that sentence might not feel so paradoxical to Kristi, which I say in an effort to understand where she's coming from. However, we can't talk about Kristi's fear of medication without mentioning the way that she frames that fear in her videos. It feels like she anticipates disapproval from her audience, and to mitigate that, she sort of talks around the subject rather than stating her feelings head on. So we need to do a little bit of reading between the lines here.
Keeping a good positive mindset and just living my life. I'm not saying that other people don't need medication or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. If this didn't help me, I would absolutely get medication for it. If at any point I feel like I need medication, I will absolutely see the doctor.
She didn't think it was necessary at this time, and nor do I. If it just started, I think if I can get it under control without meds, I certainly will. If I need them, I certainly will take them. I am not against taking meds. I take 3 as is, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm like anti-medicine, because I think that if you have issues, you absolutely should see a doctor. And I did. I'm looking positively to the future. I'm hoping that this doesn't happen again. And I'm not hoping, I know this won't happen again, because I am telling myself that it won't.
Did you catch that? It's totally fine for other people. Other people need to do it. And you know what? If I do in the future, then I will also do that. That's basically the formula for the way that Kristi couches her words in subtle disclaimers. She'll mention a subject and talk around it. Firstly, by spending a few sentences on other people and how their experiences are totally valid. And then she'll slip into a little bit of speaking conditionally or semantically if she needs to, blah, blah, blah. Or it's just in her opinion that this specific interpretation is what makes sense to her. And then she'll usually return back again to mentioning that it's always fine for other people. So we'll watch out for that, and we will return to it over a few topics. In 2017, Kristi made a video where she talked about having a massive panic attack on the way to Zach's medical appointment. She stopped the car she was driving, got out to try to calm down, and she said they were going to have to turn around and go home, and Zach had to cancel his appointment. This is a pretty important moment in our story, because not only does it show us how much of hers and Zach's lives revolve around Kristi's anxiety, but she also mentions some other highly anxious behavior. On their way back home, Kristi asked Zach to stop into a shopping center so that she could use the bathroom. While she was in there, she did 2 things which would characterize her extreme anxiety from this point onwards. The first was to Google her symptoms frantically and feverishly, and then when that didn't reassure her, Kristi reached out to her followers on Twitter and asked them for advice.
Felt like the answers they were giving me were such BS, like dictionary answers of, how to get rid of panic, and it wasn't working. And so a bunch of you guys reached out, and actually a bunch of other YouTubers reached out to me as well, which was so excellent because it made me really feel like I was not alone.
Yes. Let's just sit with that for a minute. RawBeautyKristi is a channel which has been focused on beauty for the last 4 years, but it's still being used by Kristi as a way to reach out to a community of people for personal medical advice. After she described this experience and her compulsion to both Google her symptoms and reach out for reassurance to her followers, Kristi mentioned that she had an opportunity for a brand trip to Thailand, but her panic was so bad that she cancelled it, and it just sort of ramps up from there. She talks about Googling herself and self-diagnosing her depression, which is fair, but she also diagnoses herself with diabetes because she had a numb hand at the time of the panic attack, and she had previously received blood work that showed she could be pre-diabetic. Basically, instead of turning to therapy or a psychologist or even a psychiatrist, she says that she's turned her whole life around in the past 2 weeks when she made this video because she started meditating and listening to Tony Robbins.
And I started listening to Tony Robbins. If you've never heard of him before, I'm sure you guys know who he is. Absolutely one of the most helpful people that I've ever come across. As soon as I started listening to Tony Robbins, everything in my life shifted as far as my mindset. Tony breaks that down for you and explains why you're like that and how to switch your mindset and how to just be a better person and to have more positivity and to just get shit done and quit making excuses. And I'm a super excuse maker.
I'm going to put Tony Robbins in a short section at the end of this one because Kristi is very open about who she listens to, whether they're YouTubers or public speakers. And it's a really interesting way to see what she's thinking at that time. Anyway, so because of this panic attack, she did agree to go on a drug which had previously been recommended for her to manage her PMOS symptoms and her pre-diabetic condition as well. But Kristi had previously refused this drug, I guess because of this fear of side effects from medicine in general. And at the same time, it's really clear that stress is a huge factor in how bad her physical and mental health is. So for example, she talks about a brand trip that she goes on to Hawaii, which incidentally is a really cute video. I watched this when it came out and I was so happy for her. But after the brand trip, she mentions that she didn't have a single headache when they were away. And she speculates about how there was something in the air or in the water at Hawaii, which incidentally is a big raw vegan influencer hub. Fully raw Christina lives there. So, we just can't seem to get away from that freaking raw veganism. Anyway, And all of Kristi's health issues have basically developed to a point where she's doing the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting, no therapy, no antidepressants. She's come off that drug that was recommended for her PMOS and prediabetes. The only thing that she will allow is the pain medication that she takes for her cluster headache, but every few videos would be another desperate update on the state of her mind and body. And I don't say this to judge Kristi, but I will admit that it becomes pretty tiresome when you sit down and try to watch all of these. It's just hard not to get a little bit frustrated with the constant seesaw, because she'll do something that works and then a few months later she'll be convinced that the fact that it worked means that she can stop. And this brings us pretty much to the end of 2018. So at this time, Kristi's career success is only rivaled by the increasing intensity of her mental health issues. By 2018, her husband Zach actually stopped his dangerous job doing his ultrasound stuff on pipes so that he could edit and film her videos. But part of the reason that she asked him to do this is because she was so anxious that he was going to die every day that he left for work that she wanted him to just not go to work anymore. And they were making good money. And things were about to change for them in a big way. And this would be the beginning of a complete change in Kristi's aesthetic and her ideology and even the language that she uses. But mentally, she wasn't doing well. So let's reminisce on all of this BCE, that's before cross necklace era Kristi, by going through the RBK reading list from the years of 2011 to 2019. Welcome to the first RBK reading list. This is time for us to reminisce about the kinds of things that we've learned about with Kristi in these years. So obviously we have to start with Dr. Douglas Graham, the ex-chiropractic crackpot who came up with the whole 80-10-10 raw vegan idea. This guy is an absolute hoot. I saved some footage for us to enjoy here together.
About 18 to 20 bananas, and I'm quite satisfied. So this would be lunch for me. That would more than do the job. But I might eat 2 or 3 more bananas. I could have this many more.
Because certainly the raw food movement was considerably larger 100 years ago than it is today. It was destroyed when medical people leaked the word germs out, and everybody started cooking their tomatoes and baking their apples and cooking everything for fear of germs, not understanding that as soon as you take it out of the oven, there's just as many germs on it once again as there were before, that you're breathing in microbes with every breath, and that wiping things clean, you're wiping just as much dirt on as you're wiping off, you're wiping just as much germ in as you're wiping off. Washing things in tap water, the water is very likely far dirtier than whatever it is you're washing off. I haven't missed a day due to illness since December 15th, 1980.
Yeah. So next we have Tony Robbins himself, infamous motivational speaker and multi-level marketing loser. What you need to know about Tony if you're a little bit younger is that he's one of the most famous users of a methodology of manipulation known as neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP.
Simple way to think about that is reprogramming your nervous system through the use of language. Wouldn't it be wild if we could find a way to model what people who are really effective with communication do and reproduce that model and teach it to other people? They studied Fritz Perls, who was a Gestalt therapist, Virginia Satir, who was a family therapist, and Milton Erickson, who was a hypnotherapist, and therein lies the connection between NLP and hypnosis, one of the many that we'll come to find out.
It makes Tony incredibly believable to a large number of people, and it really puts the motivation in motivational speaker. They all do this. It's just that Tony was one of the earliest and he's one of the most recognizable. Anytime you hear those motivational speakers talking in that particular cadence of rehearsed authenticity, that is NLP.
So whatever you focus on, that's what you feel. If you're supposed to meet your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whoever at 7 o'clock, you get there at 7, they're not there. Some people are pissed off. Some people are worried. It's the same event. If it's 7:30 and they're not there, they've not called, they've not texted. Now what are you feeling? Some people go, I'm really pissed off. I'm really worried.
I'm really single.
You know, I'm really single. You know? But the point is, whether you're angry or whether you're worried had nothing to do with the event. It's the habits of your mind. The person who's worried thinks, well, maybe they're in a car accident. The person's pissed off, they did it again. So the first decision you make is what are you going to focus on?
So for Kristi specifically, she talks about how Tony Robbins says the same thing that all of the culty self-help grifters do. What he says is, what you focus on is what you feel, which in my experience just means it's all your fault. For example, here is cult leader Keith Raniere, expert in NLP, saying exactly the same thing in exactly the same way.
Honesty is the best policy. And you go and you contemplate those things and you build your principles. So if you have a principle that you can vocalize or that you understand, you potentize it with emotions. Why do you do this? Because when it comes down to your body, your emotions, even your thoughts are screaming going in the other direction. When you weigh something as a decision, we make decisions on how we feel ultimately, both theoretically and practically. Here's how we feel here, but if we were to do this thing, we would feel awful.
But it's packaged up like that's an empowering thing. Like, if it's all your fault, then you can put a stop to everything that plagues you because it's actually in your control. So it makes sense to me that Kristi, who already blamed herself for everything that went wrong, would be like, you know what? Yes, that sounds really insightful. Then in 2019, Kristi was also into this lady called Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who has some very specific ideas about intermittent fasting. If you look her up, you'll find her described as a longevity expert, which is sending off alarm bells for me personally. Kristi used her app, which is called Zero, and it helped her to fast with her circadian rhythms, which, as far as I can tell, just means eating when you're awake. But okay.
And then it'll tell you how long you went for, and it has different ones in there. So you can do like the circadian rhythm fast, which is like only eating when the sun is up, which is very healthy for our bodies apparently. Lately I've been doing like a 17-hour fast, so like most of that is when I'm sleeping hours, and then I don't eat until like noon. Anything that I talk about, I highly always suggest talking to your doctor about. I have spoken with my doctor at length about nutrition and what I choose to eat, and I've actually had them recommend eating this way for me, and it's been very beneficial for me, but it may not be beneficial for everyone. So before ever going into anything, please always speak to your doctor.
That you're eating within your circadian biology in terms of when your metabolism is its most optimal. So you don't want to, for example, if you eat your first, bite of food at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then you're eating dinner at 8:30 or 9, you're basically, you've already gone past 12 hours. Sure. Your metabolism at 8:30 or 9 isn't going to be very good. Your fatty acid metabolism's not as good, so you're going to start to store fatty acids in adipose tissue rather than using them as energy. So you'll start to gain more fat mass, which has all sorts of problems. When you eat that food in the evening, you may be resetting the clock, and your body thinks it's resetting the start time of metabolism. So the whole time you're sleeping is when your metabolism's at its best, and then you wake up in the morning and it's completely misaligned.
And then in terms of YouTubers during these years, Kristi did shout out some OGs, Jenna Marbles, Shane Dawson, James Charles. She specifically talks about how Shane Dawson seems like such a nice guy and how his creativity really inspired her. So I guess I'll just let that speak for itself. And that concludes the RBK reading list from 2011 to 2019, before Kristi got really crunchy and before she started wearing her gold cross necklace. So let's get back to our story. Now, you might think, after all of the health and wellness misinformation that we talked about in part 1, that it would be difficult for me to identify the turning point for part 2, but it really wasn't. I can pinpoint the exact moment that separates Kristi's origin story from her development into what I would call CrunchyBeautyKristi, May 2019. That is the moment that Kristi shared that she was feeling inspired by fellow beauty YouTuber Elsa Ray and her pivot into off-grid living and content.
I recently rediscovered Elsa Ray, and Elsa Ray used to be a body painting YouTuber. She was in the 2015 NYX Face Awards. Incredibly talented artist, body painter, makeup artist. Now she lives a completely different lifestyle. I recently rediscovered her YouTube channel and have basically binged watched the entire thing, and I'm going to link it here because it is so inspiring.
So who's Elsa Ray? Well, she's just about the crunchiest old school granola hippie that I've seen in a long time. And what do I mean by crunchy? Because we're really about to use this word a lot. Well, crunchy refers to an ideological framework around returning to quote unquote natural ways of doing things. It started as a hippie movement in like the mid 60s and 70s. In the 90s, crunchy hippies tended to be pretty left-wing, but it has developed within our hyper-capitalist world to now represent a certain type of conservatism, which is also motivated by this idea of taking things back to a romanticized version of a simple life, where people were happy and the world was less toxic. That's the biggest idea, that things used to be good, that children used to be safe, that food used to be healthy, right? And that's what Kristi is responding to when she sees Elsa Ray's pivot into this natural off-grid lifestyle. Elsa Ray isn't Christian, by the way. I'll get that out of the way. It would appear that she's a sort of new age spiritual person. Elsa Ray is interesting. I think the biggest mark against her name is that she's like the queen of cultural appropriation. She's been making money off of visual art that culturally appropriates South Asian, Middle Eastern, and North African traditions, specifically like mandalas, and elements of their spirituality for her whole YouTube career. But you get this a lot with white hippies and like the new age spiritual world. Anyway, so Kristi had actually mentioned over this like 10-year period that she absolutely loves being outside, and the time when she's happiest is when she's in the natural world, and that she and Zach were wanting to live on acreage for many years. So this didn't come out of nowhere. Kristi ended up befriending Elsa Ray in real life, so good for them. I'll give you a quick rundown now of what happened at this time in Kristi's life, and then we'll unpack what I mean when I say CrunchyBeautyKristi. If you've had a look at the subheadings for this part of the video, then you already know what we're about to get into. So, when we last left Kristi, she was very successful in her YouTube career, but also very anxious and mentally unwell. In September of 2019, Kristi says that her anxiety is so bad that she prays when she goes to sleep that she won't dream, because most of her dreams are nightmares, so that gives you an idea of her mental state at this time. Over the next few months, so we're talking 2019, 2020, initially she was just inspired by Elsa Ray's move off the grid, but now it was becoming more and more real for her and Zach.
Finding Elsa Ray's channel sparked something in me to show that you can still have a digital life in a way, like they do. They upload videos to YouTube, they do social media still, and they still live an off-grid, very happy lifestyle where they're content. And I want to do both, not search for it in material possessions, not search for it in finances, and search for it in another way, to realize that eventually one day, and that maybe when I'm 40 years old, and maybe when I'm 50 years old, but that I don't have to rely on those things anymore. I can rely on me. And when I say off-grid, I'm not talking about giving up the internet and stuff. I want to have a fine balance. I'm pretty in every other aspect of my life. Am I all that balanced? No, I'm kind of an extremist, always have been. But I don't want to be extreme with this. I want to have a balanced life. I want to live in the middle of the woods if I want to, in my cabin, and grow my own food and keep a simple life.
They were watching TV shows about building houses and living off the land. They wanted to build their own cabins, so they started visiting cabins and staying in them. Her career is also booming. She's even nominated for the American Influencer Award, so they've got money to spend. Why not dream of a new life? Well, a few months later, in December of 2019, Kristi and Zach bought the land that would become their new home and their new channel. Yep, in the same year, Zach and Kristi started a channel called The Sweet Life of Zach and Kristi. And I gotta be honest with you, I followed this channel immediately. My spouse and I followed along this whole thing. Actually, we loved them. Actually, we were even feeling inspired by this at the time. The Sweet Life of Zach and Kristi follows their journey from day dot when Kristi and Zach were learning how to homestead even before they bought the property. They started a garden at the little house that they owned, I think, closer to the city, which is sensible, actually. And I cannot emphasize to you enough how wholesome and not conservative this felt at the time. Looking back, a lot of people point to this as being like a really clear starting point for Kristi's descent into conservatism, but that is really not how it felt to me. And I gotta tell you, like, I was on r/fundy snark. Okay, so I was clued into what this kind of stuff looked like. From Kristi, it just didn't feel like that. And I think a lot of people felt this way too, because up until this point, Kristi was who she had always been. She was irreverent, honest, unapologetic. There was no reason to think that there was a nefarious turn to conservatism in the fact that she just liked spending time outside and she wanted to have a homestead. And honestly, I was really happy for her. Her mental health was really bad, but she actually started talking about therapy. She got a referral to a therapist, which is the first step. And she also seemed to be reevaluating her life so that she could be happier and manage her mental health by being further away from the busy, bustling city and all of those expectations.
I think that therapy is really going to help me through like the fear of having kids, because a lot of my fears stem from like, well, what happens? What if the kid gets sick? What if something happens to it? What if it has a problem and it's my fault? What if it's, I do all of that stuff? What if we buy this house, but then the kid wants to play in the backyard and there is no backyard because we bought a house on the top of a mountain and we do this? All of those things that I just said are actual real fears that I have thought. Do you know how much pain and stress I put myself through unnecessarily? I had like a moment where I thought, What if that was the last time and I missed it? I didn't get to see her because of my headache. What good did that do me?
You may remember that earlier I mentioned that Zach and Kristi actually did already own a home in the city. So they finished remodeling that and then promptly decided to buy the land for their new channel, which was 20 acres with a home on it that also needed some more work. And in pure Kristi fashion, and truly you can't make this up, they decided not to sell their old home, but instead to rent it out because Kristi had been feeding a group of stray cats under her house. They were living in like the foundations, or what do you Americans call it? The crawl space. They were living in the crawl space under the house, and she didn't want to leave them high and dry. So she made sure that the people she rented to were happy to feed the cats. And Kristi actually provided cat food like perpetually for them, so that the tenants didn't have to pay for that. And then also eventually her sister would live in that home and she would feed the cats for them. But anyway, so it's the end of 2019, early 2020, they've moved out, they've gone to their new land, and they've rented out their old home with cats living underneath it. All the while, Kristi's physical health is deteriorating. She's going to like 1,000,001 doctor's appointments. She gets an MRI at one point. Everything's okay. And she starts reading a lot of self-help book about anxiety, specifically a book about anxiety and neuroscience, which I will touch on in the reading list for this later section. And she goes on and off keto, the same stuff as normal, that cycle that I mentioned earlier: get bad, take medicine, get good, go off medicine, repeat. But then in June of 2020, Kristi made one of her most successful series of videos ever, and she announced that after years of infertility, she was pregnant.
This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't real. No, this cannot be real. This cannot be real. This cannot be real. Can you give me a straw?
Are you serious? No, you're not.
I swear to God.
Are you serious?
I swear to God.
What the?
I know. I told you. Did I not tell you?
You did? What
I
the fuck?
It's a miracle. It's truly a miracle. I can't think of it in any other way than that.
In my notes for this section, I wrote pregnancy announcement. I can see why she would turn to Jesus. Dude, I teared up. It's so beautiful. She's 32. And honestly, that is a pretty fair assessment of how this video went. I cried the first time I watched it, and when I rewatched it to research this, I cried again. Like, as much as I have sat here critiquing Kristi, it was just such a wholesome moment, and I am still so happy for the both of them. So, Kristi's life completely changed after this point. As you can imagine, the same person who went straight onto Twitter to ask her followers for advice during a panic attack shared a lot of very personal medical details about her pregnancy. Now, I don't want to go through all of these, partially because, wow, that's so time-consuming, and partially because I feel like I shouldn't even know some of this information, but I'll give you the broad strokes of how this went down. Kristi gets pregnant in the year 2020. There's a lot going on for someone who already has health anxiety, and the isolation of the pandemic sends her into overdrive. Honestly, if you weren't following this closely, the beginning part of the pregnancy doesn't really feel that crunchy at all. She's going in and out of doctors, she's taking all of their advice really seriously, everything seems pretty normal, except that a bunch of disparate things that she says offhandedly start to form a pattern which, by the time she actually gives birth, is pretty undeniable. Here are the breadcrumbs. So first she responds to a question about a second baby by saying, I won't do IVF. If it doesn't happen naturally, it isn't going to, in August of 2020. Then she starts talking about hypnobirthing. Then she starts taking a lot of online courses. She's reading so many books, but she talks about how she already took lactation consultant courses when she was a doula back in the day, when she was originally trying to get pregnant. And then when she gives birth, she posts some really in-depth videos about that experience. And I'm really sorry to say that Kristi had a really traumatic birth. I mean, like the birth of her son, not her own one. I've seen a bunch of commentary about this. People have picked apart her decisions during this 48-hour period around the birth of her son, and they used them to fuel analysis, like about her ideology and stuff, which I just think is cruel. I will not be doing that. I will not be judging someone for the medical decisions they made at a really important and stressful time in their life. But I think it's worth noting that the response to Kristi's birthing stories speak to an issue which is going to come up a little bit later when it comes to HomeschoolGate. And that issue has to do with the ethics of commentating on public figures' lives and the difference between insightful analysis and kicking someone when they're down. Everyone's entitled to an opinion, but no one deserves to be bullied. So put a pin in that. Anyway, to understand what was going on with CrunchyBeautyKristi, as it were, I'm going to split my commentary into 5 sections. So we'll follow the postpartum depression, the child prodigy, the toxins out to get the child prodigy. Oh, it's prodigy. That's why it sounds so wrong. Okay, the postpartum depression, the child prodigy, the toxins out to get the child prodigy, distrust of the government, and the case for homeschooling, followed by the reading list. This is just going to help us wade through the quagmire of misinformation and disinformation where it's relevant, so let's get going. To say that Kristi experienced postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety would be an understatement. Kristi's symptoms were quite extreme. She lost a lot of weight and described frequent derealization, what sounds to me like intrusive thoughts and compulsions, and extreme panic, which just kept getting worse. Critically, Kristi's rigid fear around her son's health stopped her from trying medication for herself. It was just the perfect storm. Poor Kristi. She does mention praying to God, and we will end up talking about Kristi and Zach's experience with religion and the birth of their son. But Kristi doesn't really talk about it at this time. For 2 years after this, so that's 2021 to 2023, Kristi's content was characterized by infrequent uploading and highly detailed accounts of her health, both physical and emotional. Now, don't get me wrong, Kristi was absolutely obsessed with her baby, and obviously she has a right to be, but this wasn't always a positive thing. Kristi's health anxiety had metastasized around her newborn son into ruminating about worst-case scenarios. She also says that her cluster headaches were absolutely terrible, which makes sense because she was more stressed than she ever had been, and despite the fact that Kristi and Zach lived in their idyllic 20-acre plot of land with a beautiful burgeoning homestead, her skepticism and fear around the medical world and doctors had gotten much, much worse. Kristi was having such intense, intrusive thoughts about her child that she was paranoid that if she took any medication, it would travel through her breast milk and into her son. And because of the miraculous circumstances around his conception, I think it's understandable that Kristi was really looking forward to breastfeeding her son. But it's a bit of a catch-22 for Kristi because she really needs the help. And once she finally gets on medication in November of that year, about 10 months after the birth of her son, it really does help her. And she actually goes on to breastfeed her child for like 2 to 3 years after that anyway. I'll admit though, around 2020, when all of this started, it started to get a little bit tiring to research Kristi because the same patterns that we saw with her fad diets were now playing out with a very serious consequence of her psyche and her ability to be present in her family's life, which is the most important thing in the world to her. She was in therapy 3 days a week for pretty much all of this time, which I'm so glad for because I really hate to see her suffering, but equally her resistance towards taking psychiatric medication is so difficult to watch. She talks about trying passion flower, L-theanine, drinking water and exercise, getting enough vitamin D. She talks about cognitive behavioral therapy and journaling. She starts to talk a lot about how it takes a village to raise a baby, but she doesn't have a village. So she clearly feels very isolated and overwhelmed. From day one, community has been one of Kristi's most urgent and authentic needs, and perhaps there's something to be said about our globalized world and that some people like Kristi feel this need much more keenly than others. But either way, she really needed to believe in something, and she really needed to be surrounded by people who validated this for her. And this, in my opinion, is why we then get what I call full-blown CrunchyBeautyKristi.
Because I don't actually have a lot of community in my real life. We are very isolated out here in the middle of the woods, but not just because we live out here. I don't have a ton of friends. Like, I do have friends, a lot of people that I consider really good friends, but most of them live in other states because I met them online. So I have community, but it's not actual like local community that much. And so in order to feel like I have people that I'm talking to on the daily, social media, baby, it's really positive for me in many ways.
So before I get too doom and gloom, let's talk a little bit about how positively Kristi talks about her son, who is absolutely the light of her life and her new favorite person. So there's another side to Kristi's obsession with her son. When he was an infant, Kristi talked a lot about how he was a really high needs baby. Basically, she says he needed her every moment of every day for every little task. He needed her to eat, to sleep, to be entertained, to feel better. And look, I've never met Kristi and I've never met her baby, but what I can say is this is really obsessive behavior from Kristi, to a point where you do kind of wonder how much of the high needs of her baby are actually coming from him and how much of them are coming from Kristi herself and her need to be needed. From day dot, Kristi is wondering about how she will ever part with her son to send him to daycare or school. Well, she never sent him to daycare. Occasionally, she'd have a friend or family member care for him whilst in the same house as her, which allowed Kristi to do some other task or maybe spend some time with Zach, but she never actually took him somewhere and left him there. Obviously, this is going to be really relevant when we talk about HomeschoolGate, but in the beginning, when her son was still an infant, what this really looked like was just her speculation about what decisions they would make in the future, whilst she spent every waking moment bonding with her son and describing that bond.
I don't care what anybody else does think. It's biologically normal for him to want to nurse longer than just like a specific date or set time. Just because he reaches a specific age doesn't mean that he's going to want to stop, and I'm cool to continue. And if it gets to a point where it's not working anymore, then we'll change things. Many other cultures breastfeed their children until they're like 5. It's just really in Western culture that it's considered like taboo or weird or whatever. I don't give a literal fuck what anybody thinks about what I do. I'm happy to do it. He's happy to have it. And there's literally, I find no downsides to it right now for me. It works for our family and I love it. I love nursing him. It's just very wonderful and I just love him.
So Kristi ends up doing extended breastfeeding, at least until he's 3 years old, maybe longer. Now, I'm not here to judge this decision, and I think we can have some compassion for what this means to her. But I think we can also agree that extended breastfeeding can be a little bit weird, and the attachment and connection between mother and child with extended breastfeeding, well, it can go a little bit far.
It's got mums and the experts divided.
My concern is that at that extreme end of attachment parenting, there's that sense that I actually can't manage this world on my own, which means that if I've got a problem, I need you next to me as my mum.
The main quality I've seen in these children is empathy. These are kids who care. I have never yet seen a school bully who was attachment parented.
And he'll just go, me, like that.
When 2-year-old Levi wants to breastfeed, Simone obliges, whether she's working or out with friends.
If you're trying to talk, have a coffee and have a talk, you've got your toddler pulling you off and then he'll go and say, me, and I'll go, okay, and so he'll have a bit of a drink and then I can finish my conversation. So.
Is that good for him or is it convenient for you?
Look, he wants it, so, I think it's a bit of both, really.
Do you know Bodhi's never ever cried? Like at night for me? Yeah.
And they've gone back to basics.
I really believe it's just what we're biologically and hormonally designed to do, and that's respond to your child's needs.
The other thing I'll admit, though, is that after listening to anyone talk about breastfeeding for a long time, it does start to sound freaking weird, honestly. But, what's important for this argument is the way that extended breastfeeding can kind of slide into some fringe practices of child rearing, right? So as this is happening, her son is in his infancy and throughout the first years of his life. Even though her first channel was centered around becoming a mother, there were many years where Kristi had accepted that it wasn't going to happen, and she built herself an identity brick by brick outside of motherhood. So what we see when she does actually give birth is almost like her son came in like a wrecking ball and smashed down that entire structure that she had been building.
I need to chat. I'm trying to discover who I am. Who even am I? Who am I? I don't know. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. I don't know who I want to be.
The bricks of makeup artistry, content creation, an influencer career all crumbled, and Kristi found behind that wall what she felt to be her true calling, her true purpose, and her true identity in life, motherhood.
To describe my child, he is He's like a child prodigy. I know every mom probably says that about their kids, but my God, my kid is so freaking smart. He knows the full alphabet. He knows how to spot letters. He can say M is and he's just like so smart. I cannot believe.
Now, I don't mean to be rude, but this to me sounds pretty unlikely. Without making any real assertions about Kristi and Zach's intelligence, the other thing is that they don't send their son to school. And so all of the things that Kristi points to as evidence of her child's mind-blowing intelligence are just regular parts of childhood development.
Do this one.
Fast.
Yes. Dude, you did it. What the whiskers?
Okay.
Cat.
Yes! Oh my gosh. Let's do this word.
Dad.
Dad, yes! What is this word?
Ma.
Yeah.
Mom.
Yes! He can't read like a book or anything, but we've been working with him. He's a huge book reader. Like, this kid absolutely loves reading so much. We've been working with him for a long time. Like, he's just a very voracious book boy. He loves reading.
According to Kristi, her son has insanely good, way above average capabilities of memory, both his working memory or mid and long-term memory, evidenced by the way that he can observe things and then recall them at a later date. Also, his ability to learn letters when reading with a parent and practicing the skill of speech. And my favorite of her assertions is that her son likes hanging out with older kids more than kids his own age because he's just more evolved than other toddlers and he's not competitive like all of the other children in his age group.
Him today and just watching him like have so much fun with the other kids. Well, I would say he has fun, but honestly, kids at this age, like toddler age, 2.5, they're so competitive with one another. I find that our son really likes almost hanging out with older kids better. He prefers to be around like anybody, I would say older than like 5, because everybody his own age is it's like competition, like back up.
Which is actually kind of sad when I think about it. It was funny at first, but now I'm feeling she's kind of putting a lot of pressure on this child to be superior and feel separate from his peers. Look, maybe that's an overreach. Maybe I won't personally analyze this too much. I will just give you the facts. The facts are, Kristi is obsessed with her son. She thinks that he is the smartest person who has ever existed, and although she has no experience with teaching children or teaching at all, and everything that she's learned about raising a child is from things she's read or people in her small town, she is absolutely convinced that her son is learning faster and better than all the other kids his age. And obviously, with this knowledge that her child is a prodigy, she has to do everything that she can to protect him from the dangers of this modern world. So with that said, let's talk about child rearing, toxic wallpaper, and food dyes. In January of 2022, Kristi released a video where she talks about a crisis that she had over some wallpaper which she had ordered for her son's new room. In this video, we can see that her aesthetic has noticeably shifted away from millennial core to, I guess, what you would call cottage core. She's really into muted natural colors, olives, browns, burgundies, maroons, mustard yellows, where she used to be a lot more into, like I said, white t-shirts, blue jeans, sharp edges, and a minimalist home aesthetic. Anyway, in this video, that aesthetic change is accompanied by another, more ideological change. I guess it's represented by mushrooms.
And then I read about vinyl wallpaper because I could just, it was so thick in scent. They say it's like extremely toxic and cancer causing and stuff like that to breathe in. The VOCs, like the volatile organic compounds or whatever. Anyway, because they didn't have that like disclaimer on their website saying like, hey, not really safe to use. Especially when you're a baby, developing brains. Anyway, so I just took that down and now decided in his room I will paint it. That's where we have landed.
Just to be clear, she didn't get a refund on this because it's bogus. There's nothing wrong with vinyl wallpaper. There's nothing wrong with vinyl floors. Like 2 years prior to this, she actually installed vinyl flooring in their first house, and she talked about how good it was. There are a couple of other talking points that Kristi touches on time and time again. Things like swapping everything in her kitchen from plastic to glass, or frequently mentioning that we should avoid food dyes like yellow 10 and red 40, and we should swap them to natural dyes from beetroots and turmeric. And to be clear, specifically the words yellow 10 and red 40 are absolutely dog whistles for health and wellness disinformation. The explanations for these food dyes being toxic are spread by people who want to funnel parents away from like happily living in the present and into a mindset of conserving the way things used to be. I've put some sources in my source document if you're curious about that, but for now, that's all I'm going to say. Now, the final nail in this coffin comes a little bit later. It's in a video from 2024, but this is one of those breadcrumbs that I think really explains the previous few years. In this video from 2024, Kristi mentions a couple of facts about her mother in the context of explaining her anxieties around health and wellness. And what she says is that her mother started smoking when she was 10 years old, that her mother worked in a chemical plant when she was younger, and that's all the details I have about that, and that her mother did not breastfeed Kristi.
So maybe, as much as she died when she was young, I am not her. I live a different life from her, and I'm 50% of my dad, and my dad's still alive and healthy. Okay, your dad's still alive and healthy. Tap another round. So instead of it being all fear-based, you're building yourself back up to a level of realizing, hey, all these fears, those are valid and I had them, but I've worked through them. And now you know what? I actually don't live the same life as my mom. I eat mostly organic. I live a healthy lifestyle. We have different, she didn't breastfeed. That's a protective factor against it. There are things. I could still very well get breast cancer in my 40s. I could very well get heart disease or die of some other something, but worrying about it all day long is not going to help me.
And I think these facts are very relevant because Kristi mentions offhandedly that some of her anxiety is built around the desire to do the opposite of those things in an attempt to prevent herself and now her son from experiencing the same fate as her mother, which I will remind you was cancer. So obviously this is not rational thinking, and I don't want to judge Kristi for having these thoughts. I mean, anxiety, and as I've said earlier, what sounds to me like intrusive thoughts and compulsions are terrifying and not rational. And I have so much compassion for that. But if we look at her behavior, we see, okay, her mother didn't breastfeed her, so she did extended breastfeeding. Her mother started smoking, so she avoids every kind of cancer-related toxin she can find, regardless of how credible the information is. Her mother worked in a chemical plant, so she needs to avoid any kind of modern chemical possible, including those found in wallpaper. And it's not like every thought that Kristi ever has is super irrational and unreliable, but we can see a direct correlation between her obsession with her son and her fear and trauma from her mother's death, which is playing out as an enthusiastic commitment to the crunchy lifestyle. This is a crucial section of this video, and I can guarantee that you don't know what I'm about to tell you, because the coverage of RawBeautyKristi never mentions any of this stuff, okay? We're going to talk in this section about Kristi's skepticism and criticism of the government, and how sometimes she says some sort of crunchy and conspiratorial stuff, but other times she's making pretty good points. And in fact, I will say, Kristi is one of the few beauty YouTubers who has ever commented meaningfully on the state of our world, including climate change, including Palestine, right? So let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Kristi's opinions on the powers that be, as she would put it.
Painfully aware that they're all a bunch of liars. I don't actually believe that any of them have our best interest at heart. There may be a few in there that do good things here and there, but it's so few and far between that I don't put my faith into any sort of government authority. I feel like they'll say anything they need to say to get in power, and then they lie and change their mind. I feel like nobody has our actual best interests at heart. It's all about profit, and it's infuriating.
It doesn't matter what you say or how much you explain a situation away, you will be misinterpreted. Somebody's gonna take it the wrong way. That's just the way that it is. People are specifically talking about how I was talking about climate change on my stories. I said something on Twitter about, the Gulf of Mexico, the water, like the ocean was on fire because there was an oil spill and it caught on fire, like a pipeline exploded and there was an issue. Anyway, I was talking about that on Twitter and how it's just sad that this is all because of money. And then some people took it the way that I was saying,
oh, well, the people that work there, don't call them pathetic because they have to work for a living. And then obviously I wasn't talking about individual people. I'm not calling the workers pathetic. I'm not calling that pathetic. I'm saying it's pathetic to me that in this world, the powers that be who have the ability and the knowledge and the technology and are surrounded by the most brilliant scientists in the world who have given alternative sources of energy and fuel are being pushed to the side because of oil executives and lobbyists and people out there that are trying to protect the interest of their shareholders over the longevity of the earth that we live on. I'm talking about people who have the ability on a scale that would actually make a difference, who are choosing to actively not make a difference because the other option is more profitable. I don't like being misinterpreted. I don't like being misunderstood. And so I tended to explain myself away a lot. Somebody says something to me and I'm like, well, no. And then I kind of get in like an argument about that. And that's my bad. That's just me always wanting to make sure people know what page I'm on, because I don't want somebody being like, well, Kristi thinks that people that work on oil rigs are pathetic. No.
July 2021. Do we hear that anti-capitalist messaging from our non-political queen? Because I did, and that's pretty in line with who Kristi has been this whole time. This is someone who has always advocated for animal rights, someone who has stood up for queer people, someone who has also admitted to learning about racism and changing from who she used to be to become a better person. Now, there is a lot of coverage around the videos that Kristi has made about racism and her place in that system. I'm not going to go in depth in them here just because my script is absurdly long as it is and I want to bring you new information, but we'll put that to the side. Just know that it happened. Kristi does care and she has spoken out about racism, animal rights, queer allyship. In this video that we just saw a clip from, she says in no uncertain terms that being misinterpreted is painful for her. She really cares about how people see her and it hurts her feelings when she's trying to be the best version of herself and she's trying to be an activist for causes that matter to her, but she's willfully misinterpreted. Let's keep this in mind. A lot of Kristi's detractors point to a video that she made after Charlie Kirk's assassination as more evidence that she is really a MAGA right-winger. So let me play some of that video clip for you now.
Unfortunately, somebody had made a GIF out of the 4K up-close footage of what happened to Charlie, and I saw in horrific detail one of the worst things I've seen, and I've seen some fucked up shit. And I couldn't believe what I had just seen, so I immediately went to Instagram to say, if you guys come across the video, please don't watch it. It's so upsetting. Like, I immediately burst into tears. I don't personally consider myself like left or right. I consider myself a human with multifaceted views, and like I said, some of them lean far left, and then some of them are middle, some of them are right. It just really depends, you know? My replies instantly put me into a state of shock. I was in disbelief at the absolute horrific praise of the brutal murder of a man because of a difference in political opinion. Now, those same people would watch this video and say, it's not about difference in political opinion. Let's leave the word politics out of it. It's about a difference in opinion. So whether or not you agree with his side and what he stands for and what he believes and what he talked about, and what he touted and what he went and said on campuses, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, that is irrelevant. I don't think that disagreeing with somebody's values and political opinion should put them to death. But I guess I'm in the minority here.
Now, obviously, if we take this at face value, we can see some very right-wing talking points because, you know, this kind of centrism is really just peddling for the right-wing cause. And you might be like, wow, well, isn't this the woman who said that she slept with a gun next to her bed? So I can understand that interpretation of events. The problem with that face value interpretation is that it strips this video of its context. Kristi actually isn't a centrist, and it's only if you take these very small parts of her Charlie Kirk video that you could interpret what she's saying as centrism. What she actually describes is sadness and horror, and her opinions about free speech and censorship.
Hundreds and hundreds of people in my DMs saying that he deserved it. Why does he deserve it? Because he said things that you disagree with. Those things may be extremely harmful. Many things Charlie Kirk said that I completely disagree with.
still don't think that he should have died. Still think he was worthy of having a life, and I think that he should be allowed to state those things, even if you feel that you disagree with them. That is what free speech is, and you either agree with it or you don't. Republican, Democrat, that we can't see beyond these arbitrary labels that have been put on us by what? By who and for what? And this is the division that will cause us all to continue to fight for the rest of eternity. And it's really frustrating because I feel like there's no I feel like the people that I meet in my real life can really have these conversations and really just agree to disagree. I have friends that I completely disagree with politically. I have friends that are, oh my God, so opposite of the spectrum. And you just realize that everybody has their own reasons for believing what they believe.
What's particularly interesting about this video is that a month later, Kristi followed it up and she actually did specify what her beliefs and views are, and they are explicitly anti-ICE, anti-MAGA, anti-fascist, yes, she uses that word, and anti-Israel. Firstly, let's take a look at our pro-Palestinian queen.
I speak about Palestine all the time on my Instagram. If you guys don't follow me on Instagram and you want to know, does she care about Gaza? You bet I do. And they're all mad at me for saying free Palestine. This comes along the heels at the same time of the UK classifying pro-Palestinian protests as terrorism. That sets an unbelievable, horrifying precedent for all of us. And it should be absolutely unacceptable to every single citizen ever that this is happening, because while my husband wrote it down, what is socially acceptable for you today might put you in prison tomorrow. Today's freedom fighter or protester could be tomorrow's terrorist. UK with Palestine Action and USA with Antifa. So both of these things have recently been classified as terrorism. Today that might be an organization that you disagree with and you think, good, get rid of them. And then tomorrow it might be an organization that you agree with and that you are out protesting with. And now you might be considered a terrorist because all they have to do is reclassify what that means, and tomorrow it could be you. So it sets a really scary precedent, and you have to be okay with things being said that you are disagreeing with. So Trump is the president right now. Okay, so he might silence left-leaning voices or radical leftists, as he might call it. And so all the people on the right might be like, yeah, get him. Well, what if in 4 years a Democrat becomes president and then they start silencing all the right-leaning voices? Are you for it then? You're only for it when it silences the voices that you don't like to hear. But we can't silence any voices ever. And I think that's a really important point that we all have to come to agreement on. Otherwise, we're doomed as a society.
I honestly can't explain this any better than Kristi did, because free speech actually is a really important issue, especially on the left. And when she describes the way that any censorship laws will be used by the current ruling class, she's absolutely right. Yes, even when she says that Democrats could wield censorship laws in an unethical way, she's right. And we know that she's right because this is actually happening in America right now. The American Democratic Party is pushing through censorship laws that are thinly veiled as quote-unquote protective laws, like the Kids Online Safety Act. So when we get to HomeschoolGate later and people talk about Kristi's political affiliation, let's keep in mind that to describe Kristi as conservative politically or socially is just not true. Yes, centrism does tend to be right-leaning, but Kristi isn't a centrist, and it's a false dichotomy to say that anyone who doesn't call themselves a leftist or a liberal must then be right-wing. And I gotta call it as I see it. Kristi's opinions on censorship are absolutely correct and philosophically leftist. Additionally, she makes really poignant commentary on surveillance in our hyper-technological world.
It's a slippery slope. You can't just be okay with authoritarian fascism takeover because this is what happens. We've seen it in history, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. We can't let apathy cause us to get to a point where we are not resisting a tyrannical government overreach. This is just the beginning of what I think the digital ID and mass surveillance via Palantir can do. This isn't just an American issue, this is a global issue. You know, like I said, in the UK, Canada, all over the place, people are seeing this happening. Surveillance is being used for a long time, like, you know, with reading license plates to give people tickets when they drive too fast on a road. A lot of these things are in the guise of trying to protect the people with like pre-crime. A lot of people are not going to oppose it because it's going to feel like it's there to protect us and keep us safe. Now this is where the people will start to be like, okay, you're losing me. But hold on, does it not make sense that they will show you things, they will allow mass immigration, and then they'll show you the worst things that happened, they'll attribute them all to immigrants, and then say, we have to use digital ID, shut down, so that we can keep our country safe from all these immigrants. Being opposed to an authoritarian government overreach is, people see that as like, okay, crazy, okay, you're all anti-government. Tell me when the government has ever done something that you are like, you know what, you guys are crushing it with taking care of people. Are they just taking care of all of the unhoused people, all the homeless people? No. Are they taking care of the veterans? No. Are they taking care of the potholes? Cleaning up the drugs on the streets? Are they taking care of their citizens? Are they offering free social programs? Are they offering free schooling? No. No, no, no. Are they offering help to their citizens? Are they offering paid maternity leave? Hell no. They're offering, you get to fucking work until you die, and basically, you know what, we're gonna raise the retirement age from 62 because you know what, you need to work longer. And you know what, you want social programs? Okay, leeching off the system much. Oh, and you want free healthcare? Nothing's free in this country. Actually, your health insurance is gonna be $1,500 a month. You know how much they're gonna cover? Fucking nothing. School lunches? You got to pay 5-year-old for your school lunch, or else you don't get to eat today. That's what we're doing. So let's not pretend like these guys have our best interest at heart. And really, these are not the people that we want surveilling our every move.
Ding, ding, ding. Those are leftist talking points. Kristi is talking about socialist policies. She is endorsing a fair society and rejecting the hierarchy of capitalism and conservative right-wing government policy. But I need you to stay with me because some of Kristi's framework for understanding these socio-political issues is based in conspiracies. And a big part of that comes from her husband, Zach. Now, unfortunately, she did support Huda Katan for a really anti-Semitic post about Israel. And I do think that Kristi would have been like, oh yeah, this is chill, because based on the sources that she lists here, Zach is definitely leaning into some anti-Semitic territory with his ideas. And I think that because her husband, Zach, is like a full-blown conspiracy theorist, I'm fairly sure that's alleged. But the reason I'm alleging it is that I found a lot of people referring to Zach's Instagram follows. And I thought that was totally bogus because I think that who people follow on social media isn't necessarily an expression of their selfhood. But I will say, I did some digging on Zach's Instagram and he follows a lot of conspiracy theorists. Like, a lot. Like, enough that I'm like, okay, I think it's unlikely that he's following these people out of curiosity or maybe he finds them entertaining. I think he buys into this. Kristi said Zach did the research for this video, which includes some kooky language like Antichrist.
Behavior, that means they want to control everything. And why is it that the guys that want to control everything, the majority of them look like that guy? This is Alex Karp.
No. The government is hiring them, and they're hiring these people with these crazy ideologies that believe in this psychotic shit, that are obsessed with the Antichrist, that are obsessed with controlling the population and the way that we behave and think and act. Is a skinwalker. This dude is a freak, brother. You are a demon, you are a demon, walking on earth looking like you're in a psychosis. Why do they all look the part? You know what I'm saying? Like, the crazy hair and the look in his eye.
So I think it's pretty fair to say that he has kind of gone off the deep end, but I think it's really important to acknowledge what Kristi is actually saying here, because even if there's some problematic stuff, her actual interpretation of world events and American politics is pretty much valid and like largely not on the right. I know it's uncomfortable to admit that Kristi and Zach might have some good points when they are coming from a framework of anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories. I get that. It is uncomfortable. But if we let that discomfort color our entire interpretation of what Kristi believes, we're missing a really important opportunity to understand how we can reach people whose critical thinking and research skills are not really up to par. We're missing the opportunity to connect with them over the things that we actually do have in common. Of course, we need to look at the fact that, yes, there are patterns in the health and wellness space that lead people to make America healthy again. And recognizing these dog whistles or elements of a larger pattern is important for a socio-political understanding of all of these dangerous and damaging movements. But the thing is, just because someone exhibits some elements of the pattern, that doesn't mean that they're all in on it. And those people who are only somewhat into the alt-right, well, those are people who can be de-radicalized and brought back down to earth. So here's the thing. 29 minutes into this, you have Kristi attributing these global elites to having an obsession with the Antichrist, so it's a bit kooky. It's a bit anti-Semitic. I get that. But what she's saying about censorship here actually does matter. She's absolutely right that censorship and surveillance threatens the civil liberties and human rights of all people. But if we only refer to the small parts of this video where Kristi shows her conspiratorial colors, then all of her talk about censorship sounds like kind of crazy. But she's making a really good point. Kristi does wrap up her analysis of this situation with some pretty pessimistic stuff about the state of the internet. Just this idea that like the online world is the real world now, which is a belief held by a bunch of different people across the spectrum politically. I don't want to go on a tangent here, but I will say that Kristi's doom and gloom mindset around the internet, it only picks up steam from here. To wrap up this section, I just want to be clear that when it comes to politics, Kristi's beliefs are not cut and dry. They're not one or the other. In many ways, she interprets her skepticism of the government and the status quo when it comes to technology and surveillance through a pretty leftist lens. Yes, you heard me. But in other ways, she interprets them through a deeply problematic, dogmatic, conspiratorial lens that includes anti-Semitism and religiously motivated judgment. I know it's uncomfortable, but I'm not going to willfully misinterpret what she said in order to make a stronger argument. We're just going to have to sit in that discomfort. What we see going on from this stage is not so much about Kristi's own relationship to conservative politics and religion, but more about what she's willing to accept from the community around her, because we know that community is really important to her, but we now also know that she's explicitly anti-MAGA and anti-fascist, albeit with a slight conspiratorial bent. And we know that her husband potentially believes some things that are not true. And most of all, what we see is that Kristi doesn't position herself on the political spectrum unless she's choosing language that she feels is balanced. Here's another example of her trying to describe what her political beliefs really are.
And at the end of the quiz, it was like, you are, what did it say? This is where it put me. It was a political typology quiz. And here's, your best fit is stressed sideliner.
As we go on, we will see that for many of Kristi's detractors, the fact that she does not align herself with leftists or liberals is pretty much her biggest crime. People accuse her of being right-wing because she won't come forward and say that she is left-wing, but she's definitely not right-wing. In fact, her refusal to endorse even the Democratic Party is not actually a reflection of her conservatism or some secret agenda. It's a reflection of the distrust that she has in a hierarchical system that benefits very, very few people. It's just really ironic to me because if you follow any kind of leftist political commentary online, you will see that even democratic socialists get torn to shreds. And so it's actually Kristi's position that we seem to be looking for on the left. A position of distrust towards the entire hierarchical government system and the sham that is Western democracy. Am I here to defend the slightly religious and slightly conspiratorial framework that Kristi and Zach use to understand these concepts? No, I'm not. But I'm absolutely here to defend her actual values and her actual opinions because she's right. Not right-wing, as in she's right about the way that all of this works. And we can see that from the very beginning when Kristi worked as a wildlife rehabber making no money and she was vegan and vegetarian for many years, she actually hasn't strayed from her values of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. That is literally what she was saying about Charlie Kirk. She genuinely believes in the humanity of all people. And this is not going to be the last time that I say this in this video, but we could learn something about empathy from Kristi. So let's see how this plays out when it comes to health, wellness, and community for Kristi, living, as she does, on a 20-acre plot of land in the middle of Washington. One of Kristi's major talking points after the birth of her son is that there isn't enough community in our modern world. She frequently refers to the saying that it takes a village to raise a child and follows that up with saying there is no village anymore. Now, I think this is completely valid in the sense that looking for community is a natural human need, especially as a parent. But this is significant in part because it's calling on that crunchy idea of returning to a time when things were good, but also because this will lead to Kristi's decision to homeschool her child. In March of 2023, she mentions the possibility of homeschooling her kid. This really isn't surprising considering how obsessed she is with him and how she's already already said that she's scared of letting him go to school because he'll be spending so much time each day without her. And down the line, Kristi would develop this idea further. She will eventually talk about some Christian homeschooling curriculums, but at this time it would appear that her major motivation for homeschooling is that she doesn't want to spend any time away from her kid. When she does discuss homeschooling, she tends towards the same rhetorical pattern that I mentioned earlier, kind of couching her opinions in disclaimers in an effort to make them seem less controversial.
Would I homeschool my kid? Yeah, I don't have any. I'm not one of those people that has like a negative opinion on homeschool. I think homeschool kids are great. I think public school kids are great. I think private school kids are great. I'm not one of those people. So yeah, I would absolutely consider homeschooling him. We probably will. I'm not 100% sure on it though, still, because we still are a ways away from that. But thinking on it, yeah, I think we might do it. I'm not opposed to it at all. And I think that's gonna be our main decision maker, is just how it seems like life and these experiences will work best for our particular situation, because it's really, again, with everything, it comes down to, does it work for you and your family? And is it gonna be what's best for your kid and their personality? Because some kids will or won't benefit from being homeschooled, and you just don't know. And so knowing my kid, is it gonna be what's best? We're gonna see in a couple of years when we get to that point. And if it's not, then we won't. And if it is, then we will.
So for example, in this video, she starts by saying, look, I'm not one of those people who is against homeschooling. And then she goes on to speak equally of homeschooling, public schooling, and private schooling, as though the question had in some way assumed that she was partial to homeschooling. But the way she describes it is like, I'm happy to send my kid to public school, of course, but it's kind of defensive. She then goes on to say that she probably will homeschool her kid. Also, over the years, she's spoken not so highly of her own public school education. I think she's trying to sound understanding and be open-minded when she uses this kind of rhetorical pattern. But the truth is that Kristi has very concrete ideas, and she also is extremely sensitive to criticism. And having ideas that have become increasingly, as she even says, controversial, she anticipates the backlash and she skirts around or couches her opinions in a protective layer of defense. Anyway, there are a lot of things that Kristi does not regard as natural from 2021 onwards. By 2024, she was doing this thing where she would start her videos with TikToks that are just like sometimes motivational, largely just misinformation about how our brains react to being on the internet, basically. And it's all working towards extending the belief that our modern world is an unnatural way of living and that we can be addicted to all sorts of things, but primarily food and social media. So let's talk a little bit about that idea. What does Kristi recommend as an antidote to this unnatural world? Okay, where do I even start with this? Kristi's distrust of the medical system reaches a boiling point after years of going off and on medications for her chronic pain condition. She truly mentions going to different doctors so frequently that I was kind of shocked when, in a video in 2023, she describes her disillusionment with the medical system by saying that she has had very little actual testing and evaluation. It was just a strange thing to hear from someone who has spoken about her doctor's appointments like every video for the last 10 years and has had so much testing, including an MRI.
It's never going to hurt me to know more about what's going on in my body because that has never been evaluated. The most evaluation I've ever had is a very basic blood test, or when I beg for it to get other scans done, but it's like extremely difficult. So anyway,
I guess we can interpret that what she really means is that no one's been able to answer the questions that she really wanted them to. Like, why does she get these horrible headaches?
There's no answers. Like, nobody has any answers for us and nobody knows what to tell us. And it's just like, every time you go to the doctor, you're getting like, go on, give me nothing. Like, you're getting nothing.
So she starts moving towards this obsession with finding the root cause of her issues. And interestingly, when Kristi makes the pivot to functional medicine, she does so because her followers commented on her stuff recommending it. Functional medicine claims to be like the cross-section basically between crunchy holistic medicine and like evidence-based empirical science.
Like, I'm looking though, like I was like ferociously Googling this morning for functional medicine doctor. Now, I didn't know that functional medicine doctors are considered like quackery or like, like that it's considered like, what's the word for it? Like, not legitimate medicine? I don't know why. I'm sure that there are some functional medicine doctors out there that are like, doing weird stuff. But functional medicine, from what I understand and what I have looked into, and I didn't even know about functional medicine until I asked you guys on Instagram, and like literally my DMs were flooded with people being like, it's changed my life. Go see a functional medicine doctor. They get to the root cause, blah, blah, blah. It's not like they're anti-medication and they're all like doing only like homeopathy. Like they prescribe medication, at least the one that I'm looking into, and all of that, but they spend more time with you and try to get to the root cause.
She ends up talking about whole foods again, and it's always anecdotal. She says that someone on TikTok told her to take ginger capsules to get rid of her headaches. Her functional medicine doctor thinks she has chronic Lyme disease, which, spoiler alert, they test her for it. She doesn't have it. She starts wondering if her antidepressant is making it worse. She's always talking about someone she knows or a friend of a friend or her followers, and it just kind of made me feel like we never left 80-10-10, to be honest with you. So in 2022, like a year before this, she actually describes a situation where Zach had a really serious allergic reaction to something. They chose not to go to the hospital and just to wait it out instead. Thankfully, everything was fine, but you can see that their distrust of the healthcare system and wanting to naturally work through things was influencing some pretty risky decision making. Then in 2023, Kristi gets an updated diagnosis from a new neurologist who recommends that she try a medication. And she's just basically like, no. Even though she talks to a doctor and then she admits it probably would work, eventually the doctor's like, okay, well, if you're not going to do that, you could try this like natural anti-inflammatory at a really high dose. And Kristi's like, oh my God, amazing. Now you're speaking my language. But it doesn't end up working out. It doesn't really help. And she does go back to the medicine. Then Kristi makes a whole video about how she doesn't agree with lab-grown meat. And she's really only into eating like clean, ethically sourced meat from local farmers, which is really interesting. She actually says that she goes to a nearby farm and has the farmer talk her through every step of the process, including the slaughtering. It's just sort of interesting to see how her ethics moved from respecting animals by not eating them into respecting herself by eating really clean and ethically slaughtered food. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this either, and the fact that she does live in the countryside so that she can have this experience, I mean, good for her, right? But at the same time, she also is caring about natural fibers in the clothes that she wears, and she starts talking a lot about linen, and then she's constantly platforming this crunchy clothing company called Kristi Dawn. That'll be in the reading list. And then finally, we come back to Kristi's evergreen obsession with her weight. And she tells us that she's learning about how she might have such a struggle with her weight because of her gut bacteria. Like there's this guy who's saying that certain bacteria in your gut can dictate how fat you are. And he's talking about fecal transplantations in the guts of rats. And it's just like, it's so kooky, dude.
A study that they did. I will try to link it if I can or put it in here in a TikTok.
Are you ready to have your mind blown? Follow me down this rabbit hole. These are two identical twins. They're genetically identical, yet one of them is obese and the other one has a healthy weight. These mice are also twins. They're genetically identical, but they have the same problem. Now, both mice used to look like this until they took gut bacteria from this person and put it in this mouse. The diets did not change. They ate the same number of calories, the exact same diets, yet one of them maintained the healthy weight and one became obese. How's that possible? Yeah, it's a fecal transplant, a poop transplant. It may sound strange, but it's life-saving. But this time, something went wrong. The donor of the feces was an obese individual, whereas the recipient had always maintained a healthy weight and a healthy lifestyle. Through these studies, scientists were able to identify an anti-fat bacteria, Kristinella. If you have this bacteria, it makes it very, very difficult to gain weight.
And also, like, I don't mean to be harsh, but Kristi has PMOS and she's known this for a decade, and that does affect body type, metabolism, all those things. And she's previously managed that pretty well with a ketogenic diet. And look, it's hard because I actually don't feel qualified to stand here judging Kristi's choices and how she feels in her own body. All I can do is look at these things and put them in the context of crunchy thinking. And honestly, some of my notes for this section of the video just say, so much of this is about weight and I'm bored, I've heard it all before, I'm sorry Kristi, please move on. So maybe I'll just take my own advice and let's move on to the next section. When it comes to the damaging parts of the crunchy, all-natural lifestyle, being opposed to vaccinations is one of the most egregious elements of this ideology. A lot of crunchy mums in particular refuse to vaccinate their children, and a lot of people have pointed the finger at Kristi because of the way that she exhibits some other crunchy attitudes. The thing is, I can't find any evidence that Kristi is actually opposed to vaccinations. People mention this all the time, but I have truly scoured Kristi's content. I have been as objective as possible in interpreting her words, sometimes reading between the lines. Maybe it's just that Kristi is too smart to have put something that controversial on her YouTube channel. Maybe she did it on Twitter or an Instagram story where things disappear. I'm not saying for sure that it didn't happen, but I cannot find any evidence of this. Now, would I be surprised to find out that Kristi is anti-vax? Not at all, because that is very crunchy. And what's more old world natural than a time before we had vaccines and like safety from plagues and stuff? And, you know, as a medieval peasant myself, I gotta say I'm squarely on the side of the vaccinations. I don't miss watching everyone I know die. A painful and bubonic death. Anyway, people refer to Kristi's attitude around the COVID vaccine, but like, I don't know, she just has so much content to comb through that I can't say that I have definitively watched every single one of the over 1,000 videos on her channel. So I will definitely ask that if anyone has direct evidence, and I mean primary sources, where Kristi is talking about vaccines and that she chose not to vaccinate her son, please tell me in the comments. I will add it to my pinned post. I am very open to getting things wrong, and I will admit when I've changed my mind. I just wanted you guys to know that this is a major talking point that I found absolutely no evidence for. So that's that. Kristi Dawn is a clothing company that Kristi mentions a bunch over this period. As far as I can tell, this is like the final boss of crunchy fashion, or maybe like crunchy high fashion. This company is highly aspirational. They've got this whole ecological, natural thing going and an aesthetic that I guess I would call like tradwife core. Interestingly, they have a pre-loved section on their website which is titled Kristi Dawn Regenerates, but I read that originally as Degenerates, so I think maybe they should make the font a little less loopy and cursive. Anyway, I think it can all be summed up from this section that says, wearing farm to closet means you are supporting and participating in a solution, one where you look good and feel good at the same time. I can totally see why Kristi loves this, but I will say I was pretty put off by the tiny script at the top of the screen that says free shipping to Australia on all orders above AU $625. Like, I really am a peasant. I'm sorry. If I want reciprocal, regenerative, ethical, and evolutionary clothes, I'm getting them from an op shop, a thrift store for you Americans. I'm not spending $600. Anyway, I wanted to bring it up just because of the aesthetic of this store. I think sometimes we forget just how enticing the whole crunchy thing is. Like, you can't tell me that you don't also agree that this clothing is beautiful. And the entire atmosphere of this website makes me want to run away and have a picnic in a field of daisies. But this kind of aspiration to me is evidence of the inherent contradictions in the sort of crunchy lifestyle, because the truth about being really natural and homesteading, as you see from Kristi and Zach's content, is that it's really hard, actually. It's hard, it's dirty, it's boring, and it takes a really long time to achieve literally anything when you're trying to grow everything yourself. But if you look at this website, Kristi Dawn, what you see is that if you're a very, very rich, crunchy person, you might have a chance at the whole picnic dress in a field of daisies. Do you know what I mean? Additionally, I think that Kristi Dawn is just such a good representation of what the whole crunchy conservative aesthetic is, because of that connection between wealth and like natural fibers, basically. But I do want to be clear, Kristi isn't rich just because she looks at all of this stuff. Like, she doesn't have a lot of money, especially after 2024. Anyway. So that's Kristi's aesthetic aspiration that she does talk about in a lot of videos. Let's talk a little bit about the philosophy behind the self-help theories and characters that she recommends at this time. Kristi mentions 3 self-help authors or speakers: Mel Robbins, David Goggins, and James Clear. And what's interesting about these 3 speakers is that they all have different aspirational theories or catchphrases, but they really all amount to the same advice. And that advice is exactly the same thing that we heard from Tony Robbins earlier. Basically, everything is your fault. So when you're feeling down, you are doing that to yourself. So Mel Robbins, for example, despite having no relation to Tony, actually uses NLP in much the same way. She has a weirdly cult-like podcast where she forms deep parasocial relationships with her listeners, again, through NLP.
The most controversial thing I have ever said on the Mel Robbins podcast is when I end every single podcast by saying, I love you. And there are those of you that freaking hate it. I'm here to tell you, no, I don't need to know you, because you want the same things that I want. You want to be seen, you want to be heard, and you want to feel like you matter.
And her two major theories are the let them theory and the 5-second rule. The let them theory hinges around the idea that when things are frustrating and difficult for you, it's not actually that frustrating or difficult experience that is making it hard, but in fact, it's the way that you frame it in your mind. So for example, if one of your family members is refusing to throw out all of their plastic Tupperware and swap it for glass, then let them. It's not up to you, you're not in control of them, right? Or perhaps if someone is accusing you of being anti-vax online when you've never said anything about it, just let them. They're showing their true colors by accusing you. Look, I've been a little bit facetious with those examples, but I can see how this would be appealing to Kristi, especially with her anxiety. Anyway, speaking of anxiety, David Goggins' book Can't Hurt Me is about using your bad experiences to fuel motivation and rewire the way that you think. There's an emphasis in this book about building mental strength. Basically, by pushing yourself to do things that are really hard or distressing and harnessing your distress to expand your mental strength. And this is actually a pretty dangerous book for someone like Kristi who has really bad anxiety. This book gives her a moral framework that makes her feel virtuous for focusing on and battling through her anxiety. It's instead of taking steps to alleviate the anxiety, the more time she spends actively suffering through it, the more she feels she's building a quote-unquote mental strength. But the reality is that just suffering through your anxiety typically doesn't make it better. If Kristi could build mental strength by just surviving her anxiety, I'm pretty sure her mind would be a steel trap by now. She's been through a lot. Then we have Atomic Habits by James Clear. Kristi actually plays some of this audiobook in one of her videos and she talks about it over a couple of weeks. This book is all about understanding your mind and using that understanding to change your behavior. And just like David Goggins, I would say this book is about discipline, which again, for someone like Kristi, is a really dangerous message because her mental health issues are not a result of any lack of discipline. They're a result of trauma and a whole bunch of other factors. It really reminds me of the way that my libertarian older brother used to talk to me about mental health when I was in high school and he was in his 20s. The idea that you can be so in control of your mind that you can experience mental illness and then just decide that actually you're experiencing something else. It's just such a classic edgelord misinterpretation of stoicism. Do you know what I mean? That's not real. Finally, in this RBK reading list, I want to mention Caleb Hammer. Yep. Internet personality, Caleb Hammer, a man with a podcast where he verbally berates and insults his guests for not having good enough financial literacy or sometimes just for looking queer. When Kristi first mentions Caleb Hammer, she says that he is pretty aggressive and mean, but she also goes on over the next few videos to talk a lot about how she's making stupid financial decisions. Basically, she says she's spending too much money on eating out or ordering things from Amazon. These are talking points from Caleb Hammer's show. It's clear that she doesn't think it's acceptable for him to speak to his guests this way, but she very quickly adopts that judgmental, aggressive, and nasty way of speaking to herself. I mean, she created the character Kristi in her early days on YouTube. She's used to speaking to herself in this way. What's interesting about Kristi is that despite the fact that she beats herself up with these ideas, she never talks about anyone else in that way. In fact, when it comes to other people, Kristi is so protective and she doesn't apply the same competitive individualism to anyone outside of herself. I think it's something we really need to keep in mind as we move forward because when we talk about politics and ideology, the way that we speak to ourselves informs the way that we then treat other people. But sometimes the way that we speak to ourselves can be incongruent with how we expect other people to live. But Kristi is a really great example of how some people can hold themselves accountable in a way that they wouldn't for other people. And that expression of their values around other people is actually one of compassion, whereas their values for themselves are much more harsh and less understanding. So I want to have a look at how this kind of philosophy and self-talk plays out through Kristi's religious ideas. Let's go. In January of 2024, Kristi uploads a video where she is wearing this innocuous gold cross necklace. And by February of 2025, she will admit that she stopped swearing in her videos because it is quote unquote unbecoming. This is a far cry from the Kristi who said in every video description that she had a potty mouth because she was just keeping it real. In the video prior to the first appearance of the cross necklace, she links to a Bible app in the description, and she starts talking about coming to God and Jesus specifically. If you've been on the internet for any length of time, you will know that talking about Christianity on YouTube engages a huge built-in audience, so I think Kristi was always going to feel encouraged by the reception of this in her comments. But I do think that Kristi was surprised by this, and that's because she tends to be a bit nervous about the reception to her beliefs. And we must remember as well, Zach was a strident atheist when they met and for many, many years, so Kristi was used to having her religious ideas criticized by the person that she loves the most in her life. So it makes sense that she would be a little bit hesitant to share her stuff online. Kristi starts talking about God and Jesus. She starts talking about trying a church and being Christian. She keeps trying to come off of her psychiatric medication, but then her racing thoughts come back, and then she mentions that she's involved in community, which she specifies are a church and a homeschool cooperative. We start to see a move away from physical solutions for her mental illness like supplements and medication and towards a more philosophical or spiritual explanation, and therefore a sort of ritualistic practice that could help her to manage her mental health.
Fragility of life. I really wish that I could be blissfully ignorant in a lot of this stuff, because sometimes knowing too much is knowing too much. Because, you know, spiritually there is more to this. I mean, I would believe so. That I have been a lot more like leaning on God and things like that.
She starts volunteering at this homeschool cooperative. She's building a house for her sister on her property, which makes total sense for Kristi, by the way. It's a way for her to share her success and allow her sister the financial security of having a home. Plus, as we all know, Kristi doesn't trust a daycare with her child, so having family around might actually allow her to have a little freedom. But I will say, crucially, in this video from 2024, she offhandedly calls her property a family compound. It's just an interesting choice of words. Her life isn't like super simple and happy at this point. She comes off Lexapro, she does 3 days without it, and then she goes immediately back to it because she's having panic attacks. So she also goes back to doing therapy once a week. And again, I'm not saying this to judge Kristi, just to give you an idea of the patterns that we see in her content. I think it really is evidence of the way that her kind of holistic, natural, crunchy beliefs are at war with what she actually needs to live a happy life. It's just a shame. Her religious ideas start to funnel through her ideas about health and wellness and modern technology. So she says things like, we're not meant to live like this, how she has a social media addiction, and she has a crisis that honestly takes a couple of years around what she wants to do, who she is, and what her creative urges are leading her towards. She eventually becomes a potter, and Zach supports her. He buys her a kiln, she has a pottery room, she starts selling it online. Like, Kristi has always been creative, and she's good at it. Does this fit in with the kind of gendered Christian idea of motherhood, creating vessels to eat out of? I mean, yeah, I think symbolically it really does, but at the same time, she likes it. And I think that's really nice. Kristi is still listening to a lot of different voices within the kind of intellectual and self-help space. And as she moves towards more religiously motivated self-help speakers, there are some questions that we should ask. For one, are spirituality and self-help books kind of right-wing in general? Yes, they are, because the idea behind self-help books and non-denominational Christianity is the same. You are personally responsible for both the state of your life and your relationship with God, right? So even though community is a really big value for Kristi, and she does seem to find it through her move towards Christianity, she still approaches her relationship to spirituality in a very individualistic way. But here's a key detail that no one I've seen covering this has picked up on. So Kristi has been open for many years that she has some belief in spirituality, or the idea that there's a power greater than we can see. There's nothing controversial about that. She's always hinted at the fact that this has something to do with Jesus and Christianity, but nothing serious. And then in a video from 2024, Kristi tells the story of her birth in a different way.
My husband watches our son be born. Now, before this, I have to explain to you, which I'll ask him permission before I post this to make sure that he's okay with me talking about this on the internet. My husband is the atheist of all atheists, okay? Like, the atheist of all atheists. Like, there is no convincing him. I even told my friend this, who was very Christian. This was probably 10 years ago. And I was like, I truly believe in my soul there is no way he could ever begin to even mildly believe in God. Like, literally never. Ever. And then my atheist husband watched our baby be born. And he said it was like the most profound experience of his entire life. He felt in that moment like
he saw God. Like, it was like a spiritual experience. And he is not the one, you guys, when I tell you, like, not my husband. And he watched the miracle of life come into existence, and it literally changed him. He immediately was like, there's got to be something more to this. Like, he's never considered that, or even, because it wasn't even like he was agnostic necessarily before, but he was like pretty atheist, like, I don't think there's anything. And then he saw our son be born and was like, oh, okay, well, I feel like my life's changed forever. And so over the last 4 years, since our son has been born, I watched my extremely, deeply atheist husband turn into, like, a biblical scholar. Like, it's so fascinating to me to see that he just was like, I need to learn more. I need to know more. And so he started reading and read the Bible, and is listened to 100,000 podcasts, and is listening to things that are listening to videos from atheists, listening to people that are from differing religions, listening to Catholics versus Christians versus this versus that, trying to see where the truth lies for him.
I think this is a really powerful story. Obviously, they were both deeply affected. And you know what? I love this story. When you're in a partnership with someone for a really long time, you change, and you watch the person that you're with change. And, you know, I do speak from personal experience. I've been in a relationship with my spouse for 10 years. And I can tell you that the mark of a healthy relationship is encouraging and fostering growth in one another. And in this case, Zach has grown. He has changed. He's changed his mind. And Kristi is really encouraging about that. Now, if you're thinking, well, it doesn't really matter if Zach's turned to God because, you know, she got where she got regardless. I think that this does matter because people are blaming Kristi for pretty much all of this. And what she goes on to describe in this video is that this profound change in Zach's view of the world led to him doing a lot of research, and suddenly in their relationship, they had a new and meaningful way to connect. And if there's one thing we know about Zach, it is that he regards himself as the research guy, but he doesn't seem to be able to tell the difference between genuine disinformation, conspiracy, anti-Semitism, and quite frankly, the truth. I'm sorry, Zach. That's not an indictment of his character, right? Anyway, so Kristi starts talking about religion in her videos. And now we know that behind the scenes, someone who has been critiquing religion for the past 15 years of their lives is now coming around to it. The title of this section is actually a quote from a video where Kristi explains what she thinks hell is like. I mean, that's a big theological question. What's wild to me is that the way that Kristi talks about this, and I will mention the specific Christian speakers that she's influenced by in the reading list for this section, but this video to me literally just feels like a conversation between myself and this fundamentalist Christian manager that I had in a past retail job. It's this long hypothetical situation, these really rehearsed talking points about how God gives us free will, and then this convoluted and really vague explanation of what she actually believes. It's just really interesting to me because she's clearly couching her beliefs about moral crimes and punishments in this friendly language, and she does it by saying the same stuff as my old manager, verbatim, especially the part where she says, hell is the absence of God.
We're each given free will. And if in that free will we had chosen not to believe in God, we've been told about it, hey, that doesn't align with me, I don't like that, I don't care, I don't believe in Jesus, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in any of that. And so you've made your choice, you're like, hey, I don't care, I don't believe in any of that. And then God's like, well, you have to be with me anyway. Because if heaven is real, heaven would be eternity with him. So actually, he would be denying your free will by letting you go to heaven.
When she's trying to explain that hell to her isn't like this fire and brimstone that is going to be rained down upon queer people, and she goes to an effort to say that hell isn't bad and that she has no idea who's going to be there, she's specifically talking about this outside of the concrete talking points from fundamentalists. She doesn't talk about perversity. She doesn't talk about what is considered sin. She just talks about why she personally believes that she's going to heaven, because in heaven she will be in God's presence. Now, is it possible that she doesn't mention all of these things because she really does believe that a lot of people are going to hell? Yeah, it is possible. And I looked up the Christian speakers and authors that Kristi was recommending, and yeah, they're homophobic for sure. So I think there's a possibility that in some ways Kristi does believe that too. But I also think it would be unfair to assume that she's not capable of disagreeing with some of these people, because we can see from her activism around Palestine, for example, that she's happy to go against the party line when it comes to conservative Christians, because even though she exhibits signs of conservatism, at her core, Kristi sees herself as a loving and accepting person, and by and large, she's proven that. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest that perhaps her loving and accepting personality has gone further than many online commentators are willing to go. Now, typically people who are homophobic Christians don't respond in that same way. For example, my fundamentalist Christian manager absolutely would say things about loving the sinner, hating the sin, and how he knows that it's not appropriate to tell people that he thinks they're going to hell, but he is morally obligated to believe what he believes. And it makes him sad to think that some of these people think that they're living their lives well, right? Can you hear that Kristi has never said anything like that? I just wanted to point that out. Now, for the purpose of researching this video, I did become a member of Kristi's channel, and I will be sharing some information from her members only videos, but nothing super detailed or personal because that doesn't feel ethical to me. However, there are some things that Kristi says in these videos that I think support my argument that she's not a bigot. So I'm gonna hope for her blessing in sharing just some of these small details. One detail which I found significant is that Kristi actually acknowledges that she knows what the alt-right pipeline looks like. Specifically, she says she's watched people who are similar to her go down the alt-right pipeline, and she acknowledges that it may appear that she herself had gone down that pipeline from the outside because of that correlation. She also talks about her choice to pivot from really profitable beauty content into her homesteading lifestyle and opening a pottery business, which, let's be honest, is never going to make her as much money as her beauty content did in the past. The way that she describes this, though, is quite anti-capitalist, to be honest with you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that she's super left-wing, but we have to acknowledge that some of these political talking points and opinions can appear at different places on the political spectrum and still be wanting the same thing, right? So Kristi has a very strong sense of justice, and the capitalist system, which benefits only a few people and harms most of us, is actually something that Kristi doesn't want to be involved in, and she's never wanted to be involved in. And I want to be clear, she's not well versed in any kind of political or economic framework, so no one's coming to Kristi for political advice, and when she speaks on her opinions, she doesn't do it in a sophisticated way. She never says the word anti-capitalist, nothing like that. But that doesn't make her beliefs conservative. That just means that she's not educated on the political frameworks in which her opinions exist. She doesn't have the language to place her political beliefs on the political spectrum. And so because of that, some of the things that Kristi says are really reasonable, and some of them seem like really far out, right? She does express almost like a doomsday attitude, like she doesn't outright say it, but in her circumlocutory way, she does say that she feels like the world is sort of coming to an end. And again, this is something that we can look to as a signpost for conspiratorial thinking. But at the same time, Kristi is still not MAGA for this belief. She's not ultra-conservative for this belief. Like, she's not entirely wrong when she talks about the possibility of nuclear war in the same sentence as her desiring an off-grid homestead life. And yeah, a bunch of the homesteading world is taken up by doomsday preppers. And yeah, all of that leans towards fundamentalist Christianity. But at the same time, Kristi's managed to create a stable life for her family, and she's even including her sister in that. Her values center around community and time in nature, and then yes, some spirituality as well, but like, we don't have to give a bad faith interpretation to everything that she says. And when it comes to homeschooling, in another video she shares some really personal details that do help to contextualize her desire to homeschool her child outside of just religious reasons. And there's a lot of stuff that we can critique there. People have critiqued the fact that homeschooling is such an inconsistent way to educate children, that it's unregulated, so there's a risk that children aren't going to be educated properly, or they're going to miss developmental milestones. And when Kristi says that she'd rather teach for 3 hours a day than send her kid to school for 6 hours a day, like, yeah, that's definitely something that I would critique. And yes, she does talk about using Christian curriculums, specifically the good and the beautiful. I think there is every chance that Kristi could lean towards a homeschool co-op that does have some pretty intense beliefs. And as we approach the final and juiciest portion of my video, it's important to note that there is some behavior that does in fact support the assertion that Kristi is maybe more accepting of some homophobic conservative beliefs than she's letting on. And one of those things is the fact that she created a merch line with an explicitly homophobic and transphobic Christian clothing company. I do think that it's very, very possible that Kristi has seen the posts that this company company made and knew about their affiliations and was like, well, that's fine. There are many people in her life, including Zach, who have some pretty intense beliefs and values. And when you take a step back and look at how much she's changed, it's definitely very easy to make the assertion that Kristi has really gone off the deep end. The way she dresses, the way she speaks, the people she surrounds herself with, the ideas that she talks about, her quote-unquote natural way of living. And the things that haven't changed are her relationship towards misinformation and health and wellness. So it feels indicative of like an incredible move towards some of the more fringe beliefs in conservative America. But the problem with simplifying all of that down to an accusation of bigotry is that we lose Kristi's personhood and her humanity in that assertion. Analyzing patterns around these beliefs and the politics that they align with helps us to understand how widespread these ideas become. But when it comes to individual people, we must allow them to be complex and sometimes incongruent in their beliefs. That's what I see from Kristi, who has shown us that at her core, her values are family, community, and time in nature. And any spirituality or ideology that she talks about outside of that is actually specifically inclusive and kind. Despite the fact that she's surrounded by family and friends in a small town in Washington who have delusional right-wing beliefs, time and time again, Kristi shows us that she actually has held on to her more liberal core values. And that's much more interesting than just calling her an alt-right bigot. What I mean is that Kristi's changing beliefs are not an indictment of her character, they're a reflection of the information that is available to her. And if we're honest about who Kristi is, we see that her character is actually extremely kind. She's the kind of person who is open to learning new information and changing her mind. That's why she's religious now, and she didn't used to be. But to call Kristi a bigot for these changing beliefs is possibly more isolating to her than the 20 acres that she lives on in the middle of Washington. It's ignoring her complexity, her choices, and her autonomy. And the final thing I'll say from this section is that even if Kristi was an alt-right Christian and a bigot, a homophobe who wanted to protect her child from the influences of queer people in the world, I still believe that Kristi would have the autonomy to change her mind. So I'm going to go on now with the RBK reading list for this section. These are people that she's explicitly told us that she's watching and listening to. She has, however, also explicitly stated that she does not agree with everything that these people say. So let's take a look at who these people are. So there are 3 people in particular that I want to point to for this RBK reading list. The first is Cliff Connectler, who I have not bothered to check if that's how his name is actually pronounced. That's my bad. I did watch his videos, but I just didn't look at any time where he introduced himself. So Cliff Connectler works with his son to speak at different colleges. His whole thing is give me an answer. So since the 80s, he's been going around to college campuses and standing with a microphone, allowing students to ask him questions and then answering them. Now, I'm almost certain that the aforementioned fundamentalist Christian manager I had at a retail job listened to Cliff Connectler because his style of public speaking and the way that he structures his stories to answer these questions is very distinctive. And I think it's quite easy to emulate if you're really interested and you've watched his videos a lot. So I do feel that I've been Cliff Connectlered by someone else in Australia at this point. He's quite influential. It took me about 30 seconds to find footage of Cliff talking about how marriage between a man and a woman is a gift from God, and yeah, basically just being super homophobic.
When it comes to sexuality, we read in Genesis 2:24 that when God created us, he created us male and female and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So there's a very positive statement of why God created our sexuality, male and female. God could have had procreation happen at the end of a Q-tip. When a man and a woman mix their earwax, little babies could have been born that way.
That would be crazy.
I think this is a really interesting point because as we go on into the next section on Kristi's accusations and her response, we will learn that Kristi does in fact have gay people in her life who she loves. And I do think it's important to make a distinction between Kristi's theology and the theology of the people that she says she's listening to. We can't assume that she's eating up every word all the time, especially because she says quite clearly multiple times sometimes that's not how she feels. She says that when she's listening to these people, she takes on the stuff that she agrees with and she leaves the stuff that she doesn't. And she may not have the best critical thinking skills, but she does have core values, and those core values have never centered around exclusion or hate. She definitely covered his explanation of hell, like her explanation is straight out of his videos, but we don't know how much of Cliff's theology she fully endorses. Another speaker that I saw her reference was a man called John Lennox, who is a mathematician and also a Christian apologist, which is the word for people like Cliff and this guy John. They spend their time explaining Christianity to people, answering questions about it. It's a slightly different kind of proselytizing than what we're used to from like evangelicals, but John's happy to speak alongside evangelicals, so there you go. Anyway, John Lennox is a very friendly and warm-seeming old man. He's Irish, which I think makes a big difference in terms of like the intensity of American Christians versus European Christians. At first I thought this meant that he might actually have some more gentle beliefs, but nope, this old guy thinks that gay people should just be celibate, which is funny to me. I guess he gets to have sex with his wife, but obviously gay people don't deserve to have relationships. And all of these speakers, I have to be honest, pretty much do the same thing. They take up a lot of time to comfort you in their explanations of why they're definitely right about God. Are they homophobic? Yes. Does that mean Kristi fully agrees with them? It doesn't, but it's a pretty compelling connection. And look, if you've made it this far and your interpretation of Kristi's beliefs and actions are different than mine, I genuinely do look forward to seeing your comments on this video. I would recommend staying for the next section on the accusations because there is a lot of rhetoric on both sides that needs to be dismantled so that we can really understand what happened. This is a really, really interesting case study, so if you're ready, I'm gonna name names of these commentary creators who have spread misinformation about Kristi, so please join me as I get into the weeds to make one final declaration about the truth of the RawBeautyKristi alt-right homeschooling mega homesteading scandal. Okay, oh my god, okay, we're really gonna get into it now. In July of 2024, the small town around where Kristi lived was having a 4th of July parade. People were walking floats down the main street, I guess, and townsfolk were looking on with joy. One of these floats was a ute, which for you Americans is called a truck. With kids in the back of it, they're all wearing matching t-shirts, people are holding up handmade signs, and they're saying really conservative and hateful Christian things. And amongst them were Kristi, her son, and her husband Zach, and they were videoed and photographed at this event. This float was the homeschool cooperative that Kristi's sister established called Upper Room Academy. And Upper Room Academy was, it doesn't exist anymore, absolutely a fundamentalist and homophobic organization. I'm going to show you the video, and I want you to notice the handmade signs, the American flags, the small town nationalistic vibe, and specifically look out for the one that says #don't mess with our kids. The enemy has been defeated. Death couldn't hold you down. We're gonna lift our voice in victory. We're gonna make your praises loud. The enemy has been defeated. And death couldn't hold you down. Now lift your voice in victory. We're gonna make our woo. Gonna, the enemy has been defeated. And death couldn't hold you down. We're gonna lift your voice in victory. We're gonna make your praises loud. The enemy has been defeated. And death couldn't hold you down. We're gonna lift our voice in victory. We're gonna make your praises loud. Because the enemy has been defeated. And death couldn't hold you down. Lift our voice in victory. We're gonna make our praises loud. I'm too Jewish for this. Is that couldn't hold us down. We're gonna lift our voice in victory. Death couldn't hold you. Okay, I'm sorry for the audio. I have to avoid getting copyright struck, so I hope you enjoyed my rendition of that song that I've never heard before. Okay. Anyway, the way that this information is shared is actually very critical to this discussion. I mentioned in my introduction that almost all of the coverage around this stems from 2 Reddit threads and references to Peter Mon videos, and I mean that. Now, the Reddit threads do have some primary sources in them, but they're almost all screenshots. There's no link to the actual video that I just played for you. And the Peter Mon videos, I mean, he made probably the most videos on this out of everyone. There's not much academic integrity in the commentary genre on YouTube, so people would post videos and then say in those videos that Peter had just made a video, and then, like, I guess at the time, you could just go to his profile and it would be one of his most recent. But since he's literally made thousands of YouTube videos, it's actually really hard for me to find which one they're referring to at each specific time. So cross-referencing all of the accusations from different commentators was a pain in my ass. But here's how it went down. So the 3 major Reddit threads I found are in the subreddits FOMOir, Beauty Guru Chatter, and Fundy Snark Uncensored. And each of these Reddit threads did collate a lot of information and evidence, putting together the crunchy homesteading to homeschooling Christian story of Kristi's last 5 or 6 years. In response to this, a lot of commentary YouTubers rolled out analysis and allegations. That's the first part of this story. The second element to this story is Kristi's silence. She did not respond to any of these allegations for over a year, and whilst Kristi stayed silent, people started to draw from other areas of her career, other controversies. A couple of people talked about some racist posts that she made in the past, some of these going back 10 years, definitely before she made a video about how her understanding of racism in America had changed, which she did in 2020, and notably many commentators started zeroing in on her perceived inaction around the James Charles controversy a few years prior. And then finally, after about a year, Kristi made a response video in which she was quite angry and bitter, and she explained her reasoning for not responding earlier. This was the final nail in the coffin. It went down like a lead balloon. She was not contrite. And people hated that. So those will be the 4 sections of this final part of the video. I will address these accusations the same way that I have Kristi's content, which is to say that I'm going to unpack both the arguments from these commentators and the way that they say things so that we can actually understand what's true and what is just convincing rhetoric. I will also fact check their claims and cross-reference them with what we now know about Kristi, because the truth is somewhere in between both of their stories, and we are going to find it.
Around 4th of July weekend, there was a parade. And RawBeautyKristi's son was in this parade, and he was wearing a t-shirt. And the t-shirt was of this school that is associated with this organization whose motto is "Don't mess with our kids." And they are a very public, very conservative, alt-right, anti-LGBTQIA+ organization. It's known. The organization has been out there. After that, a lot of people were looking at this school because Kristi had said that she was building her sister a house on her property and that they were going to homeschool their kids through this, some organization, and she hadn't said which one, and that they were going to possibly host a school on her property. At the same time, or like a month after this is when this happened, Kristi came out or this organization came out, and on their website, they said that they were building a new school and hosting it at a different place. People assumed that that was Kristi's property. Kristi hasn't come out and spoken about this either way, so we don't know. And so then a lot of people assumed that Kristi really believed in this anti-LGBTQIA+ rhetoric.
Okay, perfect. So this is an accurate description from Peter Mon. But not all of the descriptions on the situation sounded like this, and not all of Peter Mon's either. Many of them sounded like this.
RawBeautyKristi is being accused of building an anti-LGBTQIA homeschool on her homestead.
It's a small distinction, but it is a pretty meaningful one. Some of the commentators were not giving the context that Kristi had brought her sister's cooperative onto her property, and instead they were saying that Kristi was instrumental in the creation of a queer-phobic homeschool cooperative. Kristi would later go on to reference this exaggeration, so we'll talk about that in her response, but it is definitely true that this small inaccuracy was really widespread. And to give you an idea of how these little inaccuracies sort of spread and metastasized, here's a clip of Peter Mon talking a few months later.
Saying, I'm not a fundamentalist, I'm the farthest thing from it, which even though she said it, people still said in my comment section, she is 100% a fundamentalist, okay? I don't know if you guys, she's a teacher, she's a school teacher. So anyway, so she's gonna build a school on her property, okay? The school, I don't know, Jesus Christ or something. But anyway.
Yeah, that's not true. I won't be using too much footage from Peter Mon in this video because he is not a very clear communicator. His videos are incredibly long and very catty. He interrupts himself, goes on tangents, and also gives weight to the flimsiest of hearsay. Trying to find the point that Peter is making is like looking for a needle in a haystack. But for some reason, everyone took his videos around this so seriously. I truly cannot understand it. Paige Kristi described it like this.
RawBeautyKristi has gotten herself involved with a anti-LGBT organization and has chosen to homeschool her children so that they won't be indoctrinated into a school system that the organization has dubbed as having an agenda.
Again, some of this is true. By choosing to house the homeschool on her property, there is certainly an element of involvement with Upper Room Academy, and Kristi has chosen to homeschool her child, but there is no evidence to say that she wanted to homeschool her children so that they wouldn't be indoctrinated into a school system that the organization has dubbed as having an agenda. I know this is going to seem like a slight difference, but it's an important one, because what we know about Kristi is that she's obsessively attached to her child and that she's having difficulty spending any time apart from him. We also know that she values family, community, and time in nature. All of those things are reasons that she's given for wanting to homeschool her child. None of those are reasons for wanting to protect her child from queer people. So let's talk a little bit about the homeschool co-op itself so we can understand what's really happening here. There were several videos made by people looking into the Upper Room Academy. I will play some short sections now from Paige Kristi's video, which really shows how involved Kristi's sister Katie is in this co-op. I want to be clear that everything that has to do with the Upper Room Academy is truly deplorable. So all of the coverage of the actual homeschool co-op in question is accurate. Like, that shit is cooked. But what we're going to talk about after this is Kristi's actual culpability. So let's hear from Paige Kristi a little bit about the Upper Room Academy, because this is a bit of a time capsule. I tried to look up a bunch of the stuff she used in this video and it's been scrubbed from the internet, so thank you for your service, Paige. Although I will say, Paige, you could have listed your sources. You could have made this a little bit easier for me to actually follow up. But hey, thanks anyway.
Don't mess with our kids, which, if you are unaware of who Don't Mess With Our Kids are, they are a far-right political group. If you go to the Don't Mess With Our Kids website, you will find a lot of anti-trans, anti-LGBT rhetoric. Like, for instance, in this section where it says, why does it matter? It says, if you ask Erin Lee, Colorado mother, why standing up for our kids matters, she'll tell you the unbelievable story of how her 12-year-old daughter was taken in by transgender indoctrination in just one 90-minute after-school club. Erin was a self-proclaimed sleepwalking Christian, but not anymore. Hear her story on why we must take a stand and say enough is enough, don't mess with our kids. Personal perspective here, this is a hate group. This is the equivalent of the EDL in the United Kingdom. You can make it sound as political as you want it to, but essentially what you're promoting is hate to children. Upper Room Academy. Here on the website, it says the Upper Room Academy is a family learning center and a homeschool cooperative that is an affordable solution for parents who desire well-rounded Christian school education for their kids. We offer through education that invites our Heavenly Father's heart into every part of the school day. Our goal for all of our teachers and our students is to feel an intimate closeness with our Father's heart as we worship, learn, and play together as a community. Now, if you go over to the Support Us tab, as you can see here, you will see a picture of RawBeautyKristi's sister, as she is one of the co-founders of Upper Rooms Academy. Now, RawBeautyKristi's sister, Katie, who is one of the co-founders of this cooperative school, has always spoken about wanting a ministry of her own. In fact, we found a video from the 3rd of September 2019 where RawBeautyKristi's sister, on a public website, can I just say this is public, available for the world to see, speaks about having a very close encounter with God and also wanting to do a ministry of her own, particularly or preferably in homeschooling. This is what she had to say way back when.
So I've been praying to God lately about showing me what he wants me to do with my life. I'm really happy in my life now. Everything is really great, but I just feel like I want to go further. I want a ministry. I want to be able to teach people about having faith. And anyway, I'm constantly watching videos on YouTube from a particular pastor named Stephen Furtick. And so it usually just pops up all of his videos in my suggested feed.
They had to take the Old Town Road off of the Billboard charts on country music because it was too different. They couldn't find a category for it. And they said, it's not country enough, but it's not rap enough. And we don't know what it is. It's different. That's why they crucified Jesus.
For those just listening and not watching, I just chucked Stephen Furtick in there. I couldn't help myself. Sorry, just so we have a frame of reference for what she's talking about.
And I never ever have any other types of pastors on there, only the guy that I had clicked on. So the fact that this video was in my feed was kind of weird. And he prayed about it and it happened. And it was a miracle. And the way that he got it couldn't have happened unless it was God. You've got to watch the video. Anyway, the things he was saying in there really spoke to me, that I really wasn't relying on God with my faith. I really wasn't. I hoped that God would do things for me in my life, and I hoped that God would answer me, but I just didn't fully believe it. I had a little bit of doubt, and the Bible says you can't have doubt within your faith. You got to believe it. And he was saying, one of the scripture verses is Matthew 21:22. It says, if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I see.
So that's what we're working with. There is no doubt that some of the videos created about this were pretty incredible in terms of the research they did, and reasonably nuanced in terms of that commentary. So for example, this video in July of 2024 from CC Suarez, uploaded in the same month as the 4th of July video, is a pretty respectful and interesting conversation.
I don't want to be someone who is like, oh, well, just because you liked a picture, that means you support something. I've been accused of being a supporter of certain political people because I have liked a few posts here or there or followed people. I have also followed the opposing side and liked their posts, yet no one sees or cares about that. So I don't want to get into that because it's like, you're delusional, calm down.
But in this video, CC Suarez does touch on one of the most pivotal talking points for this entire scandal, which is Kristi's silence.
And I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed in RawBeautyKristi. The silence is so loud. It is so loud. It is so loud and it kills me.
Peter Mon said this. Paige Kristi said this. Almost every single other creator who I'm about to mention spoke at length about Kristi's silence and how her silence was evidence of complicity.
That silence in itself was quite deafening. And as someone who, and Peter Mon even said this too in one of his recent videos,
people want answers. If you have nothing to hide from your answers, then come out and give them your answers. If you won't give them the answers, what that implies is, you know, that you got something to hide, girl. That's as simple as it is.
But up until this point, all the information that we had was what Peter Mon summarized earlier. There was the 4th of July parade. It's clear that Kristi would have known and understood that some of the beliefs in their homeschool were pretty out there, and she didn't respond to any of it. She initially liked the photo. She was there. She was hosting the co-op on her property, but her child was too young to attend. And so the question was how much responsibility Kristi had and how much of an association or endorsement Kristi had of this organization. Many of the commentators mentioned that Kristi was deleting comments asking her about the situation. So she was silent and she was shutting down any dialogue. The thing is, the longer Kristi didn't speak about this, the more the accusations grew. It was like #Don'tMessWithOurKids was a tree planted on top of Kristi's content, and its roots just started digging around in anything that she'd ever said or done, including things that she was saying contemporarily. Peter Mon began critiquing the timing of Kristi's videos whilst she avoided the scandal, somehow accusing her of, it's hard to even summarize what he was getting at here, accusing her of trying to profit off of her videos. But like in a derogatory way because she wasn't saying anything about the scandal. Like, yeah, bro, of course she was trying to profit off of her videos. You just described YouTube.
They call December AdSense month, which means like if you're going to do like videos that you think are going to get a ton of views, December wouldn't be the month that you would want to post those videos, because supposedly the AdSense money is so much better in December. Several videos that I did covering RawBeautyKristi, apparently I said, because a couple of you guys said in the comments, you called this, you said that she was going to do this. I must have said that if she was going to come out and address anything, she was going to come out and address it in December because it was AdSense month and she would probably make money. Now, and you always post those videos, and I've said this before, at the end of the month because they get the highest views and you make your most AdSense money off of those.
So if she doesn't post, oh wow, her silence speaks volumes. And if she does post, oh my god, what a greedy bitch. Look at the timing, she's doing it for the AdSense. Maybe we should put her in the lake and see if she floats. And then it became a talking point between multiple creators to critique the timing of Kristi's videos on the basis that she was trying to make more AdSense money from them.
Advertisers pay the most per 1,000 views during this season, all right? So it's kind of perfect how she lines up this video release with the peak of AdSense. Like, this is, again, the time you make the most money. People haven't really clocked that.
And I still don't understand this argument because, like, yes, that is what happens when you make YouTube videos as your full-time job. I didn't record the parts where he's going on and on about AdSense and the timing of the videos because Peter is incredibly verbose. And that's the kindest word that I could choose. But he did say this.
Right, and I think one thing that I've proven in my last couple videos is that Kristi is somebody that is very, very concerned about money.
And he follows it up by accusing Kristi of, like, having a secret events business on the side where she rents out their gazebo because she's really money hungry.
I don't know that they're not paying her to host the wedding there. Do you? I don't know. She didn't say that. She said she loves to throw parties and she's real excited about it. I don't know that she doesn't use her house as an event place and that she doesn't host it out for all these parties that she throws and they pay her money. I don't know anything about that. Do you? She's never spoken about it.
Yeah, no, Peter. She actually has spoken about it at length. She's talked about how she throws a harvest party every year, how she loves party planning, how she built the gazebo because she wanted to host community events there, and she's mentioned that she doesn't make money off of this and that she doesn't charge anyone an entry fee. So this is just like a bizarre argument to make. And honestly, even if she did have an events business, where's the crime? Okay, again, you might be thinking I'm nitpicking, but just keep in mind that most of the videos covering this situation were over half an hour long, many of them 45 minutes to an hour and a half, right? And everything they said was leading to the point that Kristi's character is questionable, that she's selfish, she's greedy, she's secretive, and she has these secretly bigoted ideas. Meanwhile, Kristi uploaded a video where she mentioned very pointedly that her sister had just got engaged to her girlfriend, and that Kristi and Zach were going to host their gay wedding in the very same gazebo that had been, hosting the homeschool.
So my sister proposed to her girlfriend and they're going to be getting married here in this gazebo in September. So you guys can come along with me. We're going to be doing like so much shopping for decorations and things like that to put on this wedding. And I'm very excited.
Okay. So this became another element that people used to prove that Kristi was a secret bigot.
Oh, and my sister proposed to her girlfriend, and so we're going to have her wedding here in September. I thought it was interesting wording. I will just say that she said my sister proposed to her girlfriend, which would make her fiance. And just because we're gay, we do use the word fiance, Kristi. I just want to educate you on that, okay? Just because we're gay or we're part of the LGBTQI plus community, we also refer to our prospective marital partners, at least while we still have our marriage rights, we still refer to them as our fiance.
So that this area I'm sitting in right now, her fiance will walk down the aisle and
I'm just so done with you, Peter. Just please get a grip. Honestly, I really tried not to be angry in this video, but sometimes, get a grip.
However, she did shoehorn in there that she was going to be hosting a gay wedding at her home, and so she had to get her property ready for that. This is like the first time anybody's ever heard about this stepsister. Like, nobody's ever heard about her before, but all of the sudden, August 2nd, now we not only learn that Kristi has a gay stepsister, but she is also hosting this stepsister's wedding. Convenient time.
That she mentioned her stepsister was getting gay married on Kristi property. That's good. Yes, yeah. Why is it gay married? Why not just married? Oh, because she wants us to believe that she likes gays.
Yeah, Kristi doesn't call this the gay wedding. She calls it her sister's wedding or the wedding they're hosting. But every single one of the commentators calls it exclusively the gay wedding. Many of them putting it in the title of their videos. You guys, like, come on with this. I think that Peter was the most honest when he called Kristi performative, because the implication is that she's a secret bigot who understands that after the video, the whole HomeschoolGate thing, people were assuming that she was homophobic. And that even though she is homophobic, she sees that the dominant cultural narrative within the beauty space online would require her to be ashamed of this. And as a result of that, she mentions really loudly that she is hosting this gay wedding as a way to performatively pretend that she's not as homophobic as she actually is. Do you hear how convoluted that is? So there is actually another way to interpret the pointed way in which Kristi included this in a video right around the time where people were accusing her of being really homophobic. And that explanation is that Kristi actually isn't homophobic. People said she was using the gay wedding of her stepsister to stunt, the same way that people would say, I have a black friend. But I actually think that it was a strategic choice where she was actually trying to show her audience that she is an ally and that she doesn't align herself with the homophobic beliefs of HomeschoolGate. It's also just a really bizarre thing to say because, once again, if you've ever had personal experience with Christian fundamentalists who are really homophobic, you'll know that they're not about to host a gay wedding on their property. And when I say strategic, I don't mean she made it up. I mean, it just happened that they were planning a wedding at that time and she was like, okay, well, I'll just let my viewers know that, like, I'm not homophobic and I love my gay sister. Like, I don't think it's that deep. And I also don't think it's particularly performative.
Are you anti-trans? Are you anti-LGBTQIA+? After building your makeup channel using like drag techniques and referring to drag techniques when you were talking, like when you were educating your audience about makeup, and you used to present yourself as an ally and now it's very unclear.
I think it's more than fair to say that RawBeautyKristi built her entire career off the backs of the queers.
Nope, that's insane, Paige. Kristi built her career on makeup. And yes, drag techniques became absorbed by the makeup community in the 2010s, but queer people don't own makeup. That is absurd, and that's a straw man argument in itself. It's just an accusation that is so exaggerated, it's not based on reality. But this insulting misinterpretation of Kristi's words is really important because the next thing that people would go on to say over and over again is that Kristi's worst crime in this whole debacle was that she didn't clarify where she stood. She wasn't 10 toes down on her bigotry. Like, if she was so bigoted, why couldn't she just have the bravery to come forward and say it?
They all left because you wouldn't say where you stood. And I don't know if you've looked around lately, but a lot of MAGA Republicans are hella proud of being a MAGA Republican. And if you're gonna be on their team, they want you to be on their team. And if you're not gonna be on their team, they don't give a shit. They're gonna leave too because you're not outwardly saying it. Your need to avoid is the problem. If you're gonna be proud, be proud. Be proud of whoever you are, whatever that means.
She isn't even willing to discuss it. To at least stand 10 toes behind her thoughts and opinions and views in the same way that Amanda Ensing did when she acknowledged her MAGA support.
Sorry for all the add-ons. I keep realizing in my editing that I was actually a little bit too fair to these commentators. Comparing Kristi to an influencer who has come out in support of MAGA is one of the most bad faith comparisons that you could make, because your whole point here is that you want to hate Kristi just like you hate Amanda, and Kristi is making it difficult for you to do that because she hasn't sided with Amanda. You cannot compare Kristi to someone who has come forward with their beliefs because you want her to be in that camp. That is not fair to do. Kristi has not come forward to support MAGA because she doesn't support MAGA. I'm gonna go on to elucidate this further, but like, seriously, you showed your hand with this page, and honestly, I think you should be embarrassed.
But what happened was social media changed, and a more liberal social media presence was probably more valuable at the time, but I don't believe that she ever really truly believed these thought processes. It's giving very much the person who has like trans rights and the trans flag in their bio, but will still call them slurs behind closed doors.
Oh, Paige. This is what we call a straw man argument. It's not just Kristi who's making them, huh? What kind of person is so performative that they would publicly support trans rights and literally call people slurs in private? What are you talking about? If someone puts the trans flag in their bio, I would say, thanks for supporting queer rights. That hypothetical isn't real and it doesn't make sense. There's a section I want to pick out from this argument though, and that's the part where she says that social media changed and a more liberal social media presence was probably more valuable at the time. But I don't believe that she ever really truly believed these thought processes. So this kind of really bad faith interpretation of Kristi was very popular, unfortunately, and I think it's actually quite inaccurate. The accusation that Kristi was always pretending to be liberal, but she was always secretly racist is really unfair, to be honest. And part of that is because whenever she has been open about her political beliefs, they're definitely not entirely conservative. On top of that, you can't base legitimate criticism off something that you have decided that a person thinks. The implication of this statement is that there is a right way to be left-wing or liberal, and there is a wrong way. And the precedent that this interpretation sets is that you can be booted from the left at any time, and that people can take a revisionist look at your behavior and say that you were never good enough, because that's what they're doing. The other implication that fascinates me about this is the idea that the culture of social media changed and that a more liberal kind of presence on social media used to be valuable. Well, the implication of that is that now a conservative opinion would be valuable, right? And if that was true, well, then there's another hole in the logic, because the thing is, RawBeautyKristi actually has every reason to be 10 toes down on her alleged conservative beliefs. Because if there's one thing we know about Kristi, it's that she really values community. And if there's one thing we know about the right wing, it's that there is a massive, vocal, close-knit community, particularly in small towns like the one that she lives in. And so if she really was homophobic, she could make a video today and turn around better views than she's seen in the last 3 years. Kristi has an opportunity every single day to take the easy route and quote unquote come out as a racist conservative, but time and time again, she doesn't. But according to HomeschoolGate, she was just hiding that.
In a nutshell, people now realize that she has been hiding her anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ plus views.
I was like, why can't she not just come out and address this? If you want to believe in this shit, stand the fuck behind it, okay? If you are anti-trans, anti-LGBT, stand the fuck behind it. That's where I'm at with it, okay?
Thankfully, this was not the only perspective on the issue. More balanced coverage of Kristi's fall from grace looked at the accusations and the allegations in the larger pattern of crunchy to alt-right or conservative internet personalities. And if you want to know more of the nitty-gritty details about the Upper Room Academy, I highly recommend this video by Hannah Needs to Live. She comes from a background in fundamentalist American Christianity, and she analyzes and explains the different sorts of curriculums that they use. I'd like to be clear that I am specifically referring to her analysis of the curriculums in this video. Hannah did actually get in touch with the Upper Room Academy personally, and she sent them an email which led them to believe that she would be a prospective parent. I have some ethical concerns with this kind of investigative work. I have outlined them a little bit in my source document. I would also like to say that Hannah uses this research as the basis to accuse Kristi of a lot of things that I personally don't think are true, but I do try to be as fair as possible in my coverage. And so I wanted to give Hannah her flowers because I personally learned a lot about the Christian homeschool curriculums and that element of fundamentalist Christianity. It's also important to note that several of the commentators on this situation are themselves queer, or in the case of Jen Love, have a queer family member for whom they decided to denounce Kristi as a way to signal that their page is a safe space and to show what their boundaries are. Jen Love is a well-known commentator in the beauty space. She was friends with Kristi, and it's my understanding that they had a personal conversation in which Jen let Kristi know that if she continued to be silent about this, Jen would have to renounce their public ties. From my understanding, Kristi said, "I totally understand your choice to do that. I hope you can understand my choice not to respond." And that's how it went. Jen came forward, she renounced her public ties to Kristi, and Kristi remained silent. Even Peter Mon has some really moving stuff about how it is to be a gay man in America, and what this kind of rhetoric means for the queer community, and all of that is really important. And then finally, we have Matt Bernstein's coverage of the situation. This is really a cut above the rest, and that's because Matt is not a commentary channel or a drama channel. He's a political commentator with a really great podcast, and one of the episodes of this podcast covered not only Kristi's situation, but also Tati Westbrook, and then situated them in amongst the broader genre of like conservative homesteaders like Ballerina Farm and Nara Smith. If you know, you know. But crucially, Matt Bernstein had a guest with him, and that guest is Derek Perez of the podcast Conspirituality. So Derek is an expert in the field of conspiracy theories and spirituality, specifically what we see in America. So when we're talking about Kristi's move towards Christianity and the other comorbid elements of her crunchy new lifestyle, Derek had a lot of insight to share.
How do we stop people from going down the pipeline, right? Like, I know lots of people, as we all do, who have their own wellness practices, whether it be yoga or crystals or like whatever else brings them joy or makes them feel good. But how do we keep people from like being exploited by the far right through this path?
Unfortunately, it's going to remain local, and unfortunately, misinformation travels much faster than good information. And so the only thing that I've seen effective are one-on-one conversations or small group conversations with people you care about. So meaning, if you're watching a friend go through it, is stepping in and trying to help that person, is sharing good information, is not just laughing or yelling at them, is actually saying, oh, that's really interesting. Did you know this though? And then trying to share something that can shift them in a direction that's going to be more informed, more science-based, and more rooted in empathy. It's a matter of intention. It's something we talk a lot about in the podcast because there is a range. Not everyone who's involved in either consuming these products and ideas or selling them are being malicious. I think a lot of them are true believers in these things. So when I see someone selling something, the first thing I have to assess is, are they grifting or do they actually really believe this is going to work? And that gives you different insights and it provides different entry points in how to have a conversation around it.
I would say with 100% confidence that when it comes to Kristi's intention, she is what Derek would call a true believer. And as Derek Perez says, that gives us insight into what kind of entry point we could use to engage her in a conversation around these ideas. I don't think anyone is arguing that RawBeautyKristi is a paragon of left-wing virtue. There are things that she has endorsed, be they medical information or political information, that are just straight up not true and damaging. Additionally, it would appear that many people close to her have some intensely hateful and right-wing beliefs. However, Kristi herself has gone out of her way to separate herself from a lot of those things. What we can see is that instead of approaching Kristi as a true believer, people have approached her as though she was a traditional grifter with a hateful agenda. And I think that is really the cornerstone of why HomeschoolGate went so wrong. If we are going to reach someone who, like Kristi, is vulnerable to misinformation and lives in a small community where most people don't have great critical thinking skills, we may want to approach them with more kindness and understanding than someone who is, as they say, 10 toes down on their transphobia. But many of the online commentators were too uncomfortable with how close Kristi has gotten to conservatism to be able to recognize that she's still a person, and in many ways she actually has refused to go down that path. So all of this went on for like a year, by the way. These were all of the talking points. Well, all of the talking points except for one. So before we move on to Kristi's response, let's talk about the James Charles allegations.
Why did she call me? Like, why did she call me if she wasn't, like, she asked for advice, but then she never took it. So why were you asking? And she said to me on the phone, like, that's really good advice. Like, that's what I'm going to do. But then she has never addressed the James Charles situation.
Okay. For those who are blissfully unaware, basically what happened was these allegations came out about James Charles, massive beauty influencer. Turns out he's been manipulating and coercing young men into situations they didn't want to be in, and a couple of young men came forward to tell stories about experiences that they had had with James whilst they were underage. And this has been known since about 2021. Now, several of the commentators who covered HomeschoolGate had previously covered the James Charles scandal. If you run in the same YouTube circle, articles that I do, then you've known about this all that time. But I want to be clear that James Charles has tens of millions of followers, and even some of the better coverage of the whole James Charles situation only gotten like a couple of 100,000 of views, and maybe there are a couple of articles printed, but it really hasn't touched James's success at all. So there are definitely a lot of people walking around who are blissfully unaware that James Charles is a predator. People realized that Kristi was still following and liking James Charles's posts right around the time of these allegations. When people noticed, they got upset because there's basically this whole boycott James Charles movement going, and Kristi ended up getting in touch with Peter Mon. They had a phone conversation where Peter was like, what's going on? Like, don't you know what's happening? And Kristi was like, honestly, there's been a lot of stuff happening in my life. Like, I didn't realize. What do you think I should do? I'll obviously unfollow him. And Peter was like, I get that, you know, there is a lot going on in your life. I've been following you, but like, I think you should probably publicly disavow him because you owe that to your followers. And Kristi was like, I get that, and I know that that's what you would do, but I just don't really want to draw attention to this, so I'm not going to do that, but I will unfollow him. And Peter was like, okay, well, that's fine. So Kristi unfollowed him. But that's not the whole story, because Kristi later clarified that on this phone call, she told Peter that she was exhausted and that in the weeks around this whole shenanigan, she was attending court to support a family member who had been assaulted as a minor by a man in their community. Peter listened to Kristi. He told her, I will not make any more videos about this, Kristi. You will not get cancelled. Her words. And then he proceeded to slam her in multiple videos over the coming years for this exact situation. Peter agreed not to share the private information that Kristi had told him, but he also omitted that from all of his coverage, and instead, he made it sound like Kristi didn't care about supporting the survivors of coercion or assault.
Kristi, I think you're a bit of a coward. I even said this to her on her phone. I said, Kristi, like, you were drawing pictures for your best friend's kid's birthday party and you support James Charles. And she was silent on the phone. I go, I just don't understand how you can be such an advocate for kids and you have a kid and yet you don't see why this is problematic and you don't feel like maybe you owe it to your audience to talk about it. Well, I'm going to really need to think about it before I put something out there. What she was afraid of was the reception, okay? People expect authenticity, genuineness, and honesty from somebody called RawBeautyKristi. The fact that she never came out and addressed the James Charles situation when she talked about a lot of situations, okay, it made it seem like she is not raw and honest.
And even Peter Mon admitted that he didn't realize that he was following James Charles on TikTok and that one of James's comments had been pinned by him. So the problem isn't actually about the social media follows and likes. It's about virtue signaling in the correct way. It's about the fact that Kristi didn't make a statement, but Peter Mon did. Some of these commentators even refer to James in their commentary as Kristi's friend, her good friend James Charles. Like, come on now.
Even referred to herself as his bestie, which I found to be weird. And I always found it funny that she would never address her connection to James Charles, her friendship to him, or anything like that. But now here in 2025, we have her addressing all these different things about her political affiliation, her being a crunchy mom, and all those different things.
But you know, she called him her buddy, right? And so like there was a whole thing last year with her claiming that she didn't know anything about what James Charles had did. What allegations against him? I had no idea. But she says that stuff privately to Peter Mon and doesn't say anything publicly.
And this is the problem with virtue signaling. Whilst all of these commentators are up on their high horse claiming to support victims, it's a publicity stunt. Kristi absolutely cares about victims, which is why she was actively speaking in court to support someone that she knew. If you've never been to a court case for a crime of this nature, you might not know just how hard it is, but I have. It is a harrowing experience. And I am appalled by the fact that Peter Mon spoke to Kristi about this and then misrepresented her because he started a movement. People refer to Kristi's quote-unquote support of James Charles as evidence of her indifference towards this kind of crime. Look at this comment from 2025. Implying that Peter called you is weird. You reached out to him, and it was about James Charles and not this parade. You have still never addressed continuing to support a known predator. This video proves to me that I made the right choice to no longer support you. This is actually insane, because the fact that Kristi called Peter instead of Peter calling her is a common talking point in response to Kristi telling this story. In a video, she used the phrase "got me on the phone," which means had a phone call, but a lot of people interpreted this to mean she was twisting the story in some way. And many refer, as this commenter does, to her continued support of James, which is crazy. She unfollowed him at the time all of this went down. All she didn't do was talk like Peter did. All of this virtue signaling around who follows James Charles feels like we're blaming the wrong people for James Charles's success. Like, why are we holding RawBeautyKristi accountable for the fact that James Charles has a massive platform? I hate to break it to you guys, but Kristi is not the make or break element of James Charles' success. The platforms and brands who bankroll him are very happy to keep him famous. They all make money off of his scandals, even he does. I get that boycotting can be powerful. Political boycotting can work, and that's great. And I think it's good that people are vocal about what kind of behavior is and isn't acceptable in the influencer world, fine. But like the tens of millions of followers that James Charles has are not checking if RawBeautyKristi was following him first. And her likes and follows weren't a reflection of her feelings towards him anyway. If anyone actually listened to her, they would know that not only is Kristi passionate about protecting children from this kind of trauma, but in her real life, she's absolutely stood up and done the hardest work you can do to support a victim in cases like these. She spoke in court. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how an experience like that changes you. And I will not hear a word against Kristi for this James Charles thing again. No one should support James Charles. But there's only one individual who deserves the blame for what he's done. And it's not RawBeautyKristi. It's James Charles. So for clarity and brevity, I'm going to summarize Kristi's 25-minute long video from October of 2025. It's titled, Finally Addressing the Rumors. Kristi begins by reading out an email that she received from a journalist who was seeking comment from her with regard to her association with homesteading and homeschooling content and its association with the alt-right. Kristi expresses how offended she is by this and how angry it made her to think that people thought that she was ultra-conservative and alt-right. She does this by accusing the journalist of basically bulldozing people's lives and, quote, leaving people dead and bloody along the way, end quote, just to make a story. Kristi describes the 4th of July parade as an experience that she had primarily with her husband and her son, emphasizing that he was really more into the candy than anything else and saying that she didn't pay attention to any of the people around her. She was very clear that she didn't even see some of the signs in front of her because her attention was taken up by her son. She specifies later in the video that she and her family had not planned to walk in the parade, but that on the day her son saw his auntie had candy, he wanted to join in, and that the homeschool co-op had extra shirts available for the kids to wear, and that's why he was wearing one in the video. In another sort of misdirection, Kristi sarcastically points out that the kids' shirts didn't say anything hateful because they only said joy, peace, and love, implying that there was a distinction between some of the hateful signs and the organization as a whole. It's a small misdirection, and it's up to you guys if you want to take her at her word for this. She proceeds to explain the situation through a straw man argument where she makes exaggerated claims about how people accused her of running a Proud Boy MAGA cult on her family property, which, as I mentioned earlier, there were accusations of this nature, but it wasn't the dominant narrative. She goes on to explain what a homeschool cooperative is, which again is a misdirection about the specific homeschool cooperative that we all know her sister was involved with, which is actually really messed up. Anyway, she talks about how a bunch of the people in that very cooperative were not even Christian and didn't have any of these intense ideas about sex and gender, without talking about the fact that many of them, including her sister, absolutely do. She says she had them on her property for 2 months, May and April, and after that school ended for the summer break, and that it was really beautiful, and it's clear that she really likes having the kids around. It's pretty clear throughout all of this that Kristi is angry and bitter, but she also goes to great lengths to explain in multiple ways that she is not associated with the whole #don't mess with our kids thing. Okay, I want to make that clear. She then goes on to the question of why she hasn't made any comment about this up until now, over a year later. This part of the video is one of the most controversial parts, and I actually referenced it in my last deep dive about the lipstick lesbians, because I personally think that people have only listened to the tone of her voice here, which is quite angry, and not the words that she's saying. So I ask you please to open your heart to Kristi's experience, even though it can be uncomfortable to open our hearts up to empathize with someone who probably doesn't believe all of the same things that we do. That's my disclaimer. Here's what she said.
Wonder, well, why didn't you just come out and say it wasn't true, if it wasn't true? Because you really let the narrative spin, obviously. Like, you could have just kind of put a pause on it. You could have said, hey, this isn't true, and we would have believed you. Would you? Studies have shown that any time an influencer comes out and says, hey, I'm innocent,
you guys definitely give them the benefit of the doubt. You really do. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You give them a lot of grace and understanding. That's usually what happens during cancellations. No, what actually happens is that you eviscerate them and say, you're just trying to save face. I ain't dumb. Okay, I know how this whole thing works.
And then Kristi says, and I cannot be clearer about this, that she does not stand with hashtag don't mess with our kids, and that she is absolutely not homophobic, and that she is completely supportive of the queer community.
If you know nothing, know this. I do not stand with don't mess with our kids. I literally didn't even know who they were before I was accused of pretty much running the organization. I don't have anything to do with them. I didn't hold a sign. My kid didn't hold a sign. There was no hate march. It was a 4th of July parade. All the posts you've seen are the most inflammatory, psychotic thing that you've ever seen. I have never and will never be anything hateful to anybody in the LGBTQIA plus community. I've been nothing but supportive and an ally to the trans community, to the gay community. Some of my best friends are gay. My sister's a lesbian. For God's sakes, have a little bit of critical thinking skills. And I know it can come off angry and that's not a good look, but you have to understand, just because you saw it on the internet does not make it true.
After this, Kristi expounds upon the way that she feels unable to speak up against the commentators and the drama channels who covered this situation because she is consistently misinterpreted. In this description, she uses a few phrases that we will talk about a bit later, such as "we don't negotiate with terrorists" and "not to fall into the trap of left or right." These talking points can be dog whistles for a more conservative ideology, but they can equally be evidence of someone who does not have a sophisticated understanding of politics. This is key because I think a lot of what Kristi has been lambasted for is her basic and unsophisticated understanding of politics, despite the fact that almost none of these commentators have a sophisticated understanding of politics themselves. It's the blind leading the blind here, and there have been so many willful misinterpretations of her words. I realize that's a messy thing to say, and you know what? I'm gonna stand 10 toes down on it. Here is what Kristi actually said.
I am not alt-right, but you said I was. You aligned me with it. I didn't align myself with it. You aligned me with it. You aligned me with it when you accused me of being it. You're straight up falling into this trap. The trap of left versus right. The trap of having to pick a side. The trap of enjoying homesteading, now being associated with being an alt-right Proud Boy youth Nazi leader. Hello? What are you even saying? No, I didn't respond to that because you wouldn't have believed me if I said it. You won't even believe me now. It's a pointless, absolute ridiculous endeavor to try to convince a group of people that can't be convinced. It's like trying to reason with unreasonable. You can't reason with unreasonable. And if you believe all this shit, you're unreasonable. It's not real. You're being lied to. You're being manipulated. And do you like it? Drama channels, man, they might be fun to watch. I get it. I used to watch people too, until that same drama channel got me on the phone and manipulated the entire conversation, took everything I said, straight up lied. Everything lie. And so now I know from back end what I said, and I hear how it comes out, and I go, oh, so it's all been a lie. So it's all been manipulated. From the get-go. It's so shisty. It's so conniving. And it's just, I refuse to be a part of it.
To be honest with you, this is really upsetting to me. I think it's deeply ironic that people have accused Kristi of being the most extreme version of who she actually is, because instead of engaging her in a conversation about where she's at and welcoming her back to the left or encouraging her to maybe adjust some of the things that she believes, Kristi is now even more disillusioned and distrusting. Kristi goes on to clarify that she absolutely is not interested in homeschooling her child because she's afraid of the other children or a queer agenda, but that in fact she wants to spend time with him, which is consistent with everything she's said so far. So again, we're talking about her intentions, which is important because homeschooling in itself is not the problem. It's the type of homeschooling and the intention to keep kids away from queer people that's a problem. Kristi then clarifies that she lost all of her sponsors. She acknowledges that a lot of the commentary around her has been very convincing, despite the fact that it has been wrong, and that she doesn't necessarily blame people for believing commentary when she chose to stay silent, which she did in an effort to mitigate the risk to her and the families that she knew. She also describes extreme harassment and doxing faced not only by her, but all of the families that were in that video and the Upper Room Academy.
They were being harassed by you. Their families being contacted by you. Fake homeschool applications being submitted by you. Signing up my sister and some of the other homeschool moms for gender reassignment surgery and having them getting phone calls. Doxing, reaching out to family members and people that used to know me. The reason I maybe didn't respond until now was because the school is not a thing anymore. And finally, I don't have to really worry about the families being harassed by you anymore. So yeah, the reason I didn't respond was not because I didn't want to clear my name or because any of the allegations are true. You can't even imagine what it's like to have hundreds of thousands of people loathe your existence because you've been called the worst things that you can be called. It's because the families were unsafe because the internet is a cesspool of psychotic, chronically online, drama-addicted weirdos. And so, no, I wasn't going to respond and make it bigger. I do wish that we were in a better climate where we could, instead of hating one another for what we think somebody might be, we could have conversations that were actually productive, and instead of attacking somebody and threatening their life and livelihood, we could just ask simply and kindly and with understanding, and then when they say something, actually try to believe them.
I agree, Kristi. I agree. She moves the discussion towards Jenna Marbles and her quote-unquote cancellation, and she basically makes the point that there's no room for people to actually make mistakes and then move on from those mistakes, because all people really want is for these people to leave the internet forever, and they won't be satisfied by anything less. And I honestly think this is a pretty valid point. And since Kristi didn't respond in the way that these people were demanding her to, that's what they want from her as well. And many of these commentators included little clauses in their videos about how they weren't demanding anything, they were just making observations and talking about what mattered to them, but they absolutely were demanding. A lot, actually. So in the same way that I read between the lines of what Kristi says, we have to read between the lines of what they say as well. Kristi is angry in this video, but equally, so was everyone who made a video about her, and that is not very conducive to a respectful conversation. The final point from her video is that
you guys have already called me the worst things that a human being can be called. You've already classified me in the worst ways a human being can be classified. I have to just wash my hands of this. It's done.
That's it. That's my summary. But let's not lose sight of that last line. You've already classified me in the worst ways that humans can be classified. This is such a simple statement, but it has stayed with me since I watched this on the day that it was uploaded. The implication of this sentence is that to be classified as ultra-conservative, as a MAGA Trump supporter, as a homophobe, is to Kristi, not to all the rest of us, but to Kristi, the worst way a human can be classified. Now, was Kristi a little bit of an unreliable narrator in this response video? Yeah, she was. I mentioned the times that she used a straw man argument, misdirection. I mentioned her tone when she was sarcastic, when she exaggerated. And yet, even through all of that very human commentary, Kristi was very clear and honest about herself and her beliefs. And this final line should tell us everything we need to know about her values and her personhood. I have spent so many hours researching RawBeautyKristi that there have been times I've gotten frustrated with her, times that I've thought like, I wish you didn't tell me this, Kristi, because that's a little bit too much information. But my observations throughout all of this are that Kristi's values are, say it with me, family, community, and time in nature. And after that, she had a spiritual awakening. Kristi is not a hateful person. I have watched so many hours of her videos, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The same person who made those racist comments in 2015 has explicitly gone on to prove her growth and disavow the person that she used to be. She used to be a bit of an edgelord, okay? We've all been teenagers. Like, can we just come back down to earth? Anyway, if you've been following this whole story, my analysis might have you champing at the bit for the ways that this video was interpreted by internet commentators, because they were not as generous as I was. So let's take a look at their arguments, and let's specifically see if anyone responded to Kristi's straw man arguments, misdirections, and exaggeration with completely logical rhetoric of their own. So the first thing that shocked me about this is that commentators kept to their talking point that Kristi was not clear enough in disavowing the accusations. And this is just after what I just showed you.
I have not said anything right now. You just said, yeah, I'm not this, but you didn't say what you are. Am I just reading into that? Maybe I am, but it's like you didn't declare, you didn't denounce. First of all, you didn't denounce the movement. You didn't outright say what you believe and that you're an ally. Like, at no point did you say that. You're not committing.
This is from a video from a creator called The Fancy Face, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that she does go on to speak from her perspective as a Black American woman to say that these kind of non-committal phrases, like not falling into the trap of left or right, really do just benefit the right wing. The Fancy Face calls out Kristi's white privilege, and she is totally right to do that. And she also discusses the identity of white womanhood in America and how this is reflected in Kristi's language, which I think is a really valuable addition to this discourse. However, she's kind of missing the forest for the trees here, because to focus on the part where Kristi mentions that her sister is gay, or the phrase about the trap of left or right, is to miss the parts of the video where Kristi really clearly denounces her support for any of the causes that she's been accused of supporting.
You see how angry she's getting, and she's like yelling right now because she's getting really worked up. She is so mad because no one said she's a Proud Boy leader. Who said that? Who said that, Christiana? Who said this? No one said that. And you notice again, she is using these little dog whistle terms, right? Of the alt-right movement, mind you, of MAGA, all right? She is using these statements like, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
And here the Fancy Face is responding to Kristi's straw man argument. Fair enough. But when it comes to those dog whistles, I think we have to return to the idea that if she actually felt this way, the easiest option would be to just come out with it. To me, this is speaking more to the kind of people that Kristi surrounds herself with and the language that they use, and that absolutely is a part of the conversation, but I don't think that by using these dog whistles, Kristi is secretly MAGA. The thing is, there's a massive built-in conservative Christian audience on YouTube. All Kristi would need to do is say a couple of right-wing and Christian talking points and her channel would be doing better than ever. So to accuse her in this video, where instead of making that move over to the right, she chooses to denounce those beliefs and continue to have less successful videos than she used to, is missing the point that she's trying to make. And then there's the commentary on Kristi's tone, her anger. I think the Fancy Face misinterprets the reason for this anger, because as far as I can tell, Kristi is upset because she actually wants our support over here on the left. Yeah, she probably has some views that are a little bit conservative, but she certainly has enough that are liberal that she doesn't want to associate herself with those conservatives. It would appear that what's really happening in this discourse is that it hinges on a false dichotomy that if Kristi isn't with us, if she isn't saying the talking points that we would say, then she has to be with them. And basically that means anyone who doesn't have a good enough understanding of what leftist politics really means, then they get lumped in with the other side. And not only is that not true, and people actually do exist across a large spectrum of different beliefs across different issues, but it's really not helpful. Because if as a leftist or a liberal or just someone who is anti-conservative, if you think that people who believe things that oppose your values are bad people, you will not be able to reach them. You will not be able to have conversations with them that are respectful. Neither of you will change your mind. And also, more importantly, if you cannot see those people as having the autonomy to change their minds and improve, that lack of empathy is going to show in your behavior. And that is what we see with the way that people are talking about Kristi. As I said earlier, no one is arguing that Kristi is a paragon of left-wing virtue. But the thing is, I don't believe she needs to be in order to be listened to and respected. Then comes back this bizarre narrative that Kristi is really greedy and money hungry.
I don't think this has anything to do with this article. Maybe it triggered like a response, but I don't think that's the primary reason. I really think it's because Vlogmas, AdSense Palooza, holiday shopping, all that's gonna happen right now. So she's trying to address something now so she can gain back subscribers, followers, and what are those? Sponsors. That's what I think that is, right?
What are you even talking about with this? Honestly. First of all, yeah, this has been her job. She wants to make money from it. She has a right to make money from it. And secondly, There's way more money in conservatism than there is on the left. I mean, this YouTube world is basically a bunch of rich assholes like James Charles, and then all of your favorite creators on the left having to ask their audiences to sponsor them with Patreons and memberships. All of that is just more work for less money. And Kristi's made next to nothing in the last year and a half. She depleted her savings severely, and she still didn't come forward and say that she supported conservatism. It's very lucrative to be a conservative influencer, and very lucrative specifically to support Donald Trump's MAGA government. If you're not aware of how this works, Ashley St. Clair has a really great series of videos where she illuminates how all of the money changes hands behind the scenes, literally from conservative politicians to conservative influencers. I've got that linked in my source document. Ashley is a great storyteller, so I'd highly recommend giving it a watch. And I also think Ashley is a really good example for this conversation because Ashley used to be a conservative influencer. She is still unlearning a lot of the things that she learned and spoke about back then. In fact, she's open about that, but she's trying her best. Even though Kristi by no means is as conservative as Ashley St. Clair was, no one is even giving her the opportunity to talk about what she believes now and maybe how she could adjust those beliefs in the future. Everyone instead is just telling her that she's a lost cause. And the next big point that these creators make is that Kristi's silence is something she can't come back from.
So, do you believe me now? You don't. So, anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!
Bye. What? Wow. She is so angry. First of all right? She is so angry right now, and she's yelling at everybody because you wouldn't have believed me anyway. How did you give people a chance? You didn't give people a chance. You didn't give people an option. What did you think was going to happen?
The irony in this response is bonkers, but this was the party line across the board of commentators. We go from Kristi genuinely and very clearly denouncing all of those accusations to her signing off by saying, "So do you believe me now? You don't." And then this commentator comes out and responds to her angry tone, focusing only on the fact that she didn't respond at the time. Yes, you're right, for a year she didn't speak. However, she just spoke. She just spoke in the video that you're responding to, and she literally denounced everything. But because she didn't apologize in this video, you are refusing to hear her. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Kristi literally said, "Why would I tell you anything? You're not going to believe me. You've already told me what you think about me." And then she's like, "Fine, I'll do it. I'll tell you once and for all, I don't support this stuff." Only to have the same commentators fulfill the prophecy that she just made. They do not believe her, and she could not have been clearer about it. Make it make sense. Once again, the problem is not actually Kristi's beliefs. The problem is that she didn't say the right thing at the right time. She didn't virtue signal in the right way. She didn't behave exactly the way that these commentators wanted her to. And it's not a question of her actual beliefs and values because Kristi has made it clear in this video that she does not want to be associated with the alt-right or fundamentalist conservatives. But the thing that's stopping her from understanding leftist politics, I'm sorry to tell you, is not her politics and beliefs. It's the way that people on the left have responded to her. Because Kristi's not perfect. Because she doesn't understand the difference between Marxist or socialist politics and Christian nationalist capitalism. But I can tell you what she does get, which is that the status quo of MAGA and the right wing is not right. She knows it's not right. She doesn't have the words for it. She doesn't have the background in political theory. But she knows it's not right, and she's not putting herself in that camp. So where does that leave her? Now there's one more crucial element to Kristi's response, and that's the way that she responded to the comments on her video. I have handpicked a couple of comments here, but I actually collated a whole bunch in my sources document, and if you are really interested in this situation, I highly recommend reading all of the comments that I put in there because they really tell a complex story. As in Kristi's video, some of her comments are quite angry and bitter. These are the ones that are most used in the commentary surrounding this.
By association in those people's eyes for not discommunicating your religious using co-op sister. That makes it sound like her sister's a drug addict. That's not what it meant. It meant that like she's using a co-op. I don't think that was accurate either. So again, it's taking this like the extreme and again cherry picking it. And it's like, no, that's not what it was. And she said, "Yep, and that's okay. I'll forever be a loving friend and companion to my family, children who need safety and love, and won't let the woke mob dictate who I can and cannot befriend or be kind to. My sister's a good person." Not the woke mob. Now, this person said you could have addressed it at the time and laughed it off. No sense in dredging it up after so much time with so much explanation and details, unless it's to stay relevant. And her response was, shut up. No, I couldn't have.
Wow, so crazy that all the comments are so positive. She goes, not everyone is drama-obsessed weirdo, it seems. So you're a drama-obsessed weirdo, apparently, if you just wanted her to make a statement and make you feel like it was a safe space on her channel. Oh, imagine. The fact that you said woke mob unironically in the comments tells me everything I need to know. And she goes, we found one, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, found what? Found one of what? You know? Then somebody says, okay, and this is valid. LOL, the sarcastic, condescending asshole attitude is especially fun because you could have addressed this all as it was happening, but it didn't. Instead, you stayed silent and allowed this narrative to grow and fester because you wanted to play the victim and shame your audience for something you assumed they would fucking do, and this entire thing was insufferable. She said, you're a disgrace, disrespectfully. Shut up and crawl your way back to Reddit.
Yes, Kristi is aggressive in some of these comments, and yes, she used the phrase woke mob, which is certainly a right-wing expression. However, many of these comments are refusing to acknowledge what she actually said. To her, that feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and frankly, it is. Additionally, there were some really interesting other comments and replies that have never been spoken about. Some, like this one, talk about the emotional response that Kristi had to this whole event and her choice to stay silent. If you aren't aligned with these awful things that you agree are awful, can you not understand why it would be shocking and upsetting for it to appear that way? Kristi replied, oh, for sure. Absolutely, people want to know. It makes sense. Flip that and try to see why it makes sense that I was rightfully terrified after being attacked. Explaining myself to my actual friends and having them drop me gave me zero confidence in responding publicly. I was in a state of trauma response and fear. I couldn't care what other people needed in that moment. I had to keep myself safe. Some, like this one, talk about the fact that this whole debacle only pushed her further in the direction of the right wing when she actually had no intention of being there in the first place. You may think that you're not this person, but what people are doing is pointing out that you're slowly getting there. And we're concerned. I can read it in the way you're replying to comments. I hope you come back to us. And Kristi replied, nope. You guys have done nothing but push me further away from ever wanting to be associated with a political party. I feel sick. And some other comments respond to the tone policing by pointing out that everyone here sounds angry and bitter. It's not just Kristi. I would love to know what your therapist would think about this. Your tone is nasty and condescending, and yes, marching in a parade behind a sign is supporting that cause. That's literally how it works. Claiming you didn't know what you were marching for would then be negligence on your part for involving your son in a movement that you don't support. This is truly disgusting. And Kristi responded, you are just an absolute weirdo. I need you to know that. My tone is exactly the same as yours. You're so self-righteous, it's nauseating, lol. We didn't march in a parade behind a sign, you numbskull. We walked not knowing there was a sign for 7 minutes until my kid got bored. Relax and touch grass. But to me, the most interesting comment came from someone who appears to be close to Kristi in real life. These comments are exactly why, guys. I wish you all knew her IRL. She really is sweet, gentle, hilarious, and loving. I've been to her house parties. Her friends and family are all walks of life. I've seen bikers, hippies, crunchy, professionals, gays, full goth badasses, quaint cottagecore mums, pastors, gorgeous perfect models, run-of-the-mill regular folks, tall ones, small ones, fat ones, etc., etc. A crazy thing happens when you don't focus on differences and find similarities. Life is interesting, enjoyable, and loving. I mean this as no disrespect to Kristi, but she really is a simple person. She really is excited about flowers, her little tree net, her garden, and her art. She's a very intent person at the same time. She's so warm, gives her full attention to you, and her sparkly eyes are always filled with love. Her and her husband are the most accepting, easygoing people. Don't complicate life, and you too will be happy. And the reason I find this comment so interesting is that the description of looking for similarities rather than differences and living in an environment where you foster friendships with people who have all sorts of different beliefs is actually very relevant to this conversation. The bad faith critiques of Kristi believe that she should cut people out of her life if they are unworthy. I get it, okay? There are definitely some people I've cut out of my life because they are unkind people with a violent ideology. However, the precedent set by judging someone's worth based on who they surround themselves with is a really, really dangerous, slippery slope. And one of the things that I find so interesting about this is that this kind of cutthroat idea is being peddled by left-wing people online, and it's actually one of the biggest weaknesses of the left-wing community right now. And the virtue signaling has reached a point where you risk being cut off by the left-wing community if you don't say the right thing at the right time. And I know this is uncomfortable, but that's exactly what happened to Kristi. Kristi does not fit into that perfect little bubble of left-wing ideology. However, she wants to be on the blue side of the map, guys. And that's why she's so pissed off that she keeps being pushed to the right, even when she doesn't want to be there. Let me bring it back to that comment, because this person is talking about Kristi's openness to being around people that she disagrees with. And this is where I'm going to make my most uncomfortable point. I think that is a really admirable trait. Yes, that is right. I think the fact that Kristi has managed to hold on to some liberal beliefs and still be close to members of her family, including her sister, I actually think that reflects really well on her. There's a lot of conversation on the left about how we've lost third spaces, about how difficult it is to be in community in this hyper-capitalist and globalized world. But what are most of us doing about this? Nothing. We're fighting about who is left-wing enough to be worthy. We've forgotten that community doesn't just mean a group of people who agree with you. Community isn't about making sure that everyone believes the same thing and that no one ever has arguments. Community is about relating to other people and sharing time, space, and resources with them. With our loss of third spaces, we've kind of forgotten what it feels like to meet people who live around you, not just people who share your ideological beliefs. And it's so deeply ironic because the whole idea of leftist theory is working together as a group, not just because you like the people in your group, but because everyone, no matter how annoying or stupid they are, deserves to live a good life. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but Kristi understands that. She has a right to feel angry that people are trying to exclude her from her own beliefs when she herself is friends with so many people who she doesn't agree with. Derek Perez is right when he says that it matters what the person you're talking to is intending with their misinformation or conspirituality. Someone like Kristi might be a lot more open to changing her mind if she was approached with kindness and patience. When people de-radicalize, they do it because they have respectful conversations with people who understand that they have the autonomy to change their mind. By judging Kristi purely by the way that she fits into the overall patterns of the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, we are denying her the autonomy to make up her own mind, and without that autonomy, she has correctly observed that even if she does change her mind, she will not be believed and she will not be welcomed. And that is a huge problem for those of us who want to change the status quo as it moves further and further to the right, because we have to see people as they are, plastic, changeable, and autonomous. Everyone has the potential to change. There's one final point I have to address in all of this, and that is the way that these commentators couch their own words and their demands in their own disclaimers. Not unlike the way that Kristi rhetorically approaches controversial issues, a lot of these commentators included sections of their videos, almost all right at the end of the video, about how they weren't actually accusing Kristi of being a bad person, and they could understand that she had people in her small town life with, small town opinions. And none of these, to me, were as egregious as Paige Kristi's, who uploaded an 1-20-minute long video absolutely tearing Kristi to shreds and then followed it up with this.
I really hate making these more political videos, but I feel like it was definitely necessary for me to at least give some parts of my opinions and perspectives. But I do just want to make it clear, whatever you believe is whatever you believe. Dude, my besties are MAGA supporters. It might not be what I support, girl, but I love you. And I believe that everybody has the ability to choose and believe in whatever the hell it is that they want to believe in. I don't have to share your opinion to respect you as a human being. So I don't want anyone to walk away with the idea that I condemn her for having these thoughts and opinions. I don't. I just want you to take the plunge and stop being a goddamn coward.
Paige, what are you talking about? Oh my god. Paige, what are you talking about? Respectfully, What are you talking about? You spent over an hour tearing this woman's life to shreds, not allowing her the room to grow, looking at things that she said in 2015 and holding them against her now, and then purposefully creating this narrative where all of the people around Kristi are, in fact, a reflection of her. And you started this video by admitting that you're a little bit crunchy. Now you're ending the video by saying that not only are you a little bit crunchy, just like Kristi, but that you also have people in your life who are MAGA losers with intensely conservative beliefs. But it's possible for you to be able to think critically about that and denounce what they have to say, but still be friends with them? And what, Kristi is either too stupid or too greedy to hold her own beliefs and be friends with people who believe something worse than she does? Like, what are you talking about? None of that makes sense, and it's not fair. All right, I had to take a few deep breaths while writing this and come back down to earth, because I understand that Paige Kristi is just trying to express her values. I get that, but this hypocrisy made me really angry on Kristi's behalf, because I think I've been pretty fair to her in this video. And when I say fair, I mean I have analyzed what she said and I have critiqued a lot of her rhetoric as well as her beliefs, but I gotta tell you, I don't think that Kristi is too stupid to make up her own mind about stuff. I think Kristi is allowed to be friends with people who have fallen into conservatism. I think Kristi is a good friend. She made friends on the internet in like 2011 that she's still friends with now. I think that she actually does have quite a lot of emotional maturity and I still really like her. I don't think it's fair to say that a comment she made on Instagram in 2015 is a good representation of what she believes now. I don't think it's fair to say that because she didn't speak out about James Charles, she has no moral compass. And I really don't think it's fair to talk at length about her associations with people who are conservative, and then come on and say that it's okay for you to have associations with people who are conservative, but the way that Kristi does it is not the right way to do it. It actually makes me really angry. I need to move on from this point. Okay. I think it's time to wrap this up now. RawBeautyKristi is not MAGA. No, she's maybe a little misguided. She believes some things about health and wellness that aren't true, and potentially her husband also believes some things a little conspiratorial. But the truth is that if Kristi actually was MAGA, I think she'd be shouting it from the rooftops. All the money is on the right. Now look, she's not a full-on lefty, okay? She doesn't have a great understanding of politics, so she doesn't really understand that even centrism really leans towards the right. So that makes it a little bit uncomfortable to talk about the real issue with HomeschoolGate. Because the real issue is that she wasn't wrong about the way that people treated her online. People did make stuff up. People didn't believe her. The whole thing spun way out of control, and it was really aggressive and ultimately unfair. The question then is not about Kristi herself, but about who we look to commentate on these situations. What public intellectuals can we trust with the analysis of online personalities, content, and lifestyles? Now, I'm happy to go on record and say that I consider many YouTubers to be public intellectuals. We do look to them to understand what's going on and form our opinions on things. That doesn't necessarily make these commentators well-informed or particularly original. It just means that they're the people we like to listen to. And I'm just going to go ahead and say the quiet part out loud here. Even though a lot of the commentators on YouTube who've covered HomeschoolGate are members of minoritized groups themselves, commentary and drama channels as a genre are not typically well-informed about political theory. So you have these people who always band together with a basic understanding of right and wrong, who generally lean towards virtue signaling rather than actually analyzing or responding to online events with real insight. As I researched this, I sort of noticed this paradox where online commentators were slamming Kristi for not having a sophisticated understanding of politics and not aligning herself with enough left-wing ideas. And yet these very same commentators aren't exactly experts of leftist politics themselves. And it's not everyone, as I said, but it's most of them. And I tried to be as fair as I could about the other commentators who I mentioned in this video. But Kristi is a real person, and those creators stripped her of her humanity. No one took the time to listen to her whole video about Charlie Kirk. No one took the time to actually evaluate her political opinions. No one acknowledged her support for Palestine. And even the videos she made where she admitted to working to unlearn racism were used against her. Every element of complexity was stripped from her personality. After 15 years of sharing her life online, Kristi became a cardboard cutout, a caricature of herself. And all the while, she was still there, watching her reputation become bigger than her actual self. Ultimately, these commentary and drama channels have made up the character of RawBeautyKristi, a person who is ultra-conservative, quiet, with a secretly hateful agenda, someone who believes children need to be protected from secular society. And when Kristi called that out and she said, "You already made up your mind about me and it doesn't matter what I say," she was right. We need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves how we're planning to change people's minds about politics and philosophy. Because the Kristi who walked in that 4th of July parade was a lot more open to learning about left-wing politics than the Kristi who's talking to us now in 2026. 2026 Kristi is feeling pretty justifiably angry and traumatized about how everything went down. She's much further away from being reachable by us here on the left, and yet before all of this happened, she did consider herself to be pretty liberal. Kristi isn't perfect, but she shouldn't have to be. Let this story be a wake-up call to those of us who follow commentary on YouTube. I think it's time that we stop scrutinizing RawBeautyKristi. Once I realized how much of this whole scandal was a smear campaign, I felt incredibly conflicted about the scope of my investigation and my analysis of her life. She is a real person, and her choice to be a public figure doesn't change that. Ultimately, I chose to critique Kristi because I think it's really important for us to understand that no one deserves to be bullied, and no one is perfect. Kristi is human. She has foibles, just like all of us, but she's not the person that HomeschoolGate made her out to be. The thing is, like I mentioned earlier, I used to work with a manager who is a fundamentalist Christian, and that experience helped me to understand what it really means to approach people with empathy. That experience helped me to understand my own politics and values. Because even though he pissed me off sometimes, through all of our conversations, I was able to recommend him a Fundy Fridays video, and he watched it, and then we ended up talking about it. I mean, this was a white, fundamentalist Christian Australian man, and I am a Jewish queer woman. There was a chasm between us. But it took kindness from both of us to be able to have productive conversations and bridge that gap. This man had some pretty whacked out beliefs, okay? Like really far out. But he is a human being, and I don't believe that he's a bad person. He grew up in an incredibly insular Christian community, and it was only through his workplace that he was meeting people outside of that little bubble. So instead of being angry and instead of being aggressive, I was able to be respectful, and I could see the horizons of his worldview expanding. And at the same time, I could feel my own ability to empathize and have patience expanding. I know that there have been times where I myself did not have the kindest beliefs, and conversations that I had with people who had a better understanding of what my beliefs were actually doing out in the world changed my mind. When it comes to online commentating, you might ask, what does that look like? In a landscape where I made the thumbnail for this video what I made it, I don't have an answer. But I am really curious to see what any of the commentators who I included in this video have to say about this. And I know that I have been scathing, but I do value the world of online commentary. I mean, I'm in here with you. And that's where I want to end this video. I really would love to hear what your opinions are. I'm sure there are people who've disagreed with what I have to say, but hey, maybe you've learned something. And for all of the channels that I mentioned in this video, if you do make videos in response, even if you disagree with me, I do want to say thank you in advance, because this discourse literally gives my life meaning. I decided to start making these kind of videos because I believe I have something to add to the conversation, but you guys started the conversation, and I am really grateful for that. We're all putting ourselves on the line for sharing our opinions in this space. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. My name is Disgruntled Townsperson. I am currently working on filling up the 666 spots in my mysterious benefactor tier on Patreon. If you like me here, you'll love me on Patreon. I write fun poetry. You guys get to decide what I write about. Once every 3 months, I will also write you a short story, an original work of fiction based on something that you vote for. I also include blog posts, essays. I give you plans and updates on what I'm working on and exclusive videos. I'm really hoping that I can grow this into something that brings a lot of value to YouTube, dare I say, commentary. But I do have videos outside of commentary planned as well. I've got a lot of opinions about books and TV shows. So if you like short form content, please follow me on TikTok. I'm quite active there. And that's all from me today. I know this was a little bit messy and juicy, but I figured, hey, I'm disgruntled. I'm anonymous. I might as well just full send it. And thank you, my fellow peasants. I'm on the ground with you. Please don't work too hard and make sure you get outside just for you and not for your yard work duties. Alrighty, at this point, I would like to personally thank my mysterious benefactors: Alison Danley, Isabel, Rebecca May, Ray, Farrah Harper, Sarah, and Eden. Some patrons of the arts are merely philanthropists, and some of them are just all around super hot and sexy people with great personalities and incredible taste. And I am so proud to say that every one of my patrons is one of the latter. What have you got to say, buddy? And that's that. Thank you for watching.